The anime starts by introducing us to Kunon Gurion, a completely blind kid who asks his parents what it means to be able to see. This sudden question takes them by surprise, and while they're in shock, Kunon mentions that everyone says that his eyes can't see, but he doesn't even know what it means to see. Kunon's mother stares at him in concern, but his father decides to speak up and explains that it's to be able to perceive colors and shapes. Despite this, Kunon clearly doesn't know what colors and shapes are, so he's still just as confused. His father reminds him that his eyes bear the hero's scar left by the holy knight Hister Huglia, and that's extraordinary, so he should be proud. Kunon simply accepts this with resignation, but he can't stop wondering why the maids always feel sorry for him just because he can't see. One day, a maid named Iko guides him through the manor to meet his new magic tutor. Kunon doesn't understand why he has to study magic, but Iko tells him it would be a waste not to, since he was born with a water crest, and being able to use magic is an amazing thing. Kunon reminds her that even if he could use it, he still can't go anywhere without someone's help, so he doesn't get the point. Even so, after a while walking through the house, he finally meets Ginny Course, who tells him that she'll be his magic tutor starting today. Just a few minutes into the class, Kunon grabs a magic wand and manages to cast a spell successfully. He doesn't know what kind of magic he's using though, so Ginny lets him know it's a water spell called Aori, which allows him to produce water using magic. She mentions that what he just created is about the size of an eyeball, and that immediately catches his interest. Ginny panics, thinking that she said something rude, and tries to explain that she thought an analogy might help him understand better. Kunon is just trying to process the size of his eyes and what he just created, and in no time, he comes to the conclusion that he might be able to create them. Just then, Kunon feels fully determined and decides that he will make his own eyes with magic. At lunch, he starts feeling the food he's eating with his hands, taking apart his sandwich just to inspect what's inside. Kunon never thought anything of it before, but now he can't help but be curious about what's in his sandwich. Everything feels intriguing now, and he wonders what the fresh grass-like thing in his mouth is. Iko informs him that it's called lettuce, and the thing on the loaf of bread is mustard. Kunon grabs something else from his plate, thinking that it's an apple, but Iko tells him that it's actually a plum. She notices how curious he is now, and mentions that it feels rewarding to cook now that he's interested in different foods. Kunon inspects a strawberry and tells her that he's now interested in what kind of food he's eating, but he's smelling too many scents. This clearly is because Iko prepared way too much food, but she keeps saying that it's truly been so rewarding to cook. Later that day, a lady named Flora meets Kunon to read him a book, as she always does. To her surprise, Kunon tells her that he'd like to hear the story of the holy knight Hister Huglia. Flora is a little taken aback by his request, but she reluctantly agrees after Iko reassures her. She asks Kunon to let her know if it becomes too much for him to hear, clearly worried about his well-being. Kunon reassures her, saying that he's thirsty for all kinds of knowledge right now. It is explained that a long time ago, there was a war between the heroes of the world and the demon lord. The hero of this nation, Hister Huglia, finally defeated the demon lord, but he lost an arm and a leg in the fierce battle. Since the war, every now and then the descendants of Hister are born with something missing, such as an arm, a leg, or eyesight. People have called such children reincarnations of the hero's scar. However, Kunon sees himself as his own person, and he recognizes his magical power as his own. During training, he manages to cast the Aori spell and multiplies the water droplets by 4. Kunon is completely determined, because using his power, he can cast magic, and with his magic, he will make eyeballs. He's decided to do it at any cost, but after casting that spell, he realizes how hard it truly is when his body suddenly collapses. Once he recovers, he understands that he needs way more knowledge and stamina, because they're necessary for strong magic. Iko reminds him that he's still 7 years old and doesn't eat much, but he'll definitely grow up eventually. Kunon tells her that that'll be too late, and passing out from using basic magic is out of the question. Iko explains that suddenly increasing his food intake will be bad for him, so they should do it in phases. Kunon agrees and says that he also wants to strengthen his muscles, but he's not good at running or walking. Iko then suggests sword practice, and since Kunon isn't against the idea, she tells him that she'll find him an accomplished teacher. Kunon stops her before she can leave to thank her for everything, and this makes Iko very happy, but she tells him that she would also love a raise. A few days later, Kunon is finally training with the sword, and Uro, his new tutor, instructs him to pay attention to the muscles of the arms and shoulders. He also tells him to swing down in the order of shoulders, elbows, then wrists, and Kunon follows all his instructions. Iko observes the class closely until she notices that Genier has arrived and lets Kunon know. Kunon pauses his training to greet her, and Uro tells him that it's already time for his next lesson. Once he leaves, Genier approaches Kunon and mentions the fact that he's begun learning swordplay. Kunon explains that it's because he needs knowledge and stamina to use magic. Genier is kind of surprised, noticing how much he has changed in only a few days. Iko quickly exchanges Kunon's sword with a wand, and Genier decides to review Aori from the last lesson. She doesn't expect much from him, but when Kunon casts multiple water spheres at once, she's left totally speechless. Genier can't understand how he's mastered this much on his own when she has only taught him a little, and it honestly makes her think that Kunon is truly frightening. In another scene, we see Princess Mirika Huglia at her manor, and her maid lets her know that her carriage is ready. Mirika only wonders if she really has to go, so the maid asks her if she hates the idea of visiting her fiancé that much. Mirika mentions that she's sure Kunon feels the same way, way, because he always looks gloomy. The maid reminds her that this is the king's decision, so Mirika has no choice but to go. Once in the carriage, Mirika starts thinking about Kunon, who was born with the hero's scar and is an important person to the kingdom of Huglia. She knows that this political marriage is part of her obligation as royalty, but she can't help but remember when they first met. She always tried to cheer him up, asking him what he liked and what he wanted to play. However, Kunon's only answer was nothing, because he can't do anything or go anywhere alone. Marika's expression turns sad as she remembers that, and she can't believe that she has to look at that gloomy face for the rest of her life. Much to her surprise, when she sees Kunon again, he greets her with a bright smile, more lively than ever. Mirika doesn't know how to react to that, and when she asks him what happened, Kunon tells her that he fell in love with magic. He decides to show her his Aori spell right there, creating a water sphere and taking it a step further by turning it into a small rainbow over her. Mirika is completely delighted by the sight, recognizing how impressive it is. Kunon apologizes for having made her tread lightly around him and asks her if she'll listen to his stories today, because he's done a lot of fun things lately. Mirika stares at him in surprise because she didn't know he could make a face like that. Without hesitation, she holds his hand and follows him, actually eager to hear his stories. By the end of the day, she returns home thinking about how fun her day with Kunon was, and she hopes she can see him again soon. In the meantime, Kunon also thinks about her after she leaves because he has never offered his hand to her before. Iko tells him that's because he's a true gentleman, and Kunon suddenly feels the need to learn how to behave around Mirika. That's why he decides to ask Flora, saying that he wants to be a gentleman who is worthy of Princess Mirika. Flora gladly agrees and tells him that they'll go over the poise and manners of a noble, but Iko interrupts her and asks her to make him a gentleman with a sense of humor. Meanwhile, we see Genie in the middle of her turmoil, wondering what to do after seeing Kunon's capacities with magic. Creating 7 beautiful water balls simultaneously is something even she can't do after all. He has literally perfected the elementary magic already, so he's learning way too fast, and there's nothing she can teach him anymore. Despite this, Genie decides to move on to the intermediate magic, but she immediately changes her mind. The person next to her room hears her desperate rambling and asks her to shut up, which makes her even more nervous. Genie tries to calm down, saying that this was supposed to be a sweet gig, getting paid handsomely to teach elementary magic to a kid. While magic is convenient, it's not necessarily safe, so it's too soon for a 7-year-old like Kunon to learn sophisticated magic. Even so, Genie suddenly grabs her pen and starts writing down, saying that it's too soon to give up. The person next door asks her to shut up again, clearly not happy about how loud she is being. Genie panics and apologizes again, but she continues writing, saying that she won't give up on this job since she has bills to pay. The next time she sees Kunon, she excitedly tells him that they'll try something different. Kunon tells her that he can accept anything she has to say after hearing it in her beautiful voice. It's clear he's trying his new charm after learning how to be a gentleman, and Genie notices that he's changed yet again. Leaving that aside, she explains that the Aori spell he's been using simply creates water, so they'll break down the magic involved. Kunon asks her if that means separating producing water, making water float, and maintaining the ball shape of the water. Genie praises him for his answer and tells him that they can break it down even further if they think about the temperature, viscosity, composition, color, shape, sheen, scent, and taste. She explains that there can be a wide variety of water and decides to show him by creating 2 water balls. Kunon touches each one of them and instantly notices that one is cold and the other one is warm. Genie confirms this and says that magical altercations add character to magic, which is what clearly defines and differentiates each sorcerer and their talents. Kunon understands that one becomes capable of altering fine details of magic, so the next time he casts the Aori spell, he manages to create water with flavor. Iko takes a sip of that water and mentions that it has apple flavor, but Kunon corrects her and says that it's actually plum. Genie almost instantly pales when she sees that Kunon immediately mastered the magic alteration she stayed up all night to come up with. She tries to keep her cool and mentions that it seems he can do them all, but Kunon tells her that it's actually a bit challenging. This takes her by surprise, but Kunon promises her that he will do them all eventually. That night, he stays up in bed, holding 2 apples, and thinks about the fact that he can tell the shapes and scents, but he doesn't know the colors. If he doesn't, he can't create magical alterations nor create eyeballs, so he has to get it done because he wants to see everything in this world. The next morning, Iko asks him what he would like to drink, and he tells her that he wants milk tea with no milk. She then asks him for some hot water, so Kunon casts Aori to create a hot water ball. Iko can't hide how impressed she is, and mentions that magic is truly a wonder, especially seen by someone with no magic, since it's like a divine miracle. Kunon moves the water ball around, and the moment it goes near the apples, he abruptly stands up in shock. Iko quickly catches the water with the teapot and asks him what's wrong, clearly worried about his sudden reaction. After a moment of stunned silence, Kunon tells her that he thinks he saw something. Iko immediately puts everything down and asks him if that's true, but Kunon tries to tell her that he doesn't know, and technically, he doesn't think he saw. Iko doesn't hesitate to pinch his cheeks, saying that she wanted him to be a gentleman with a sense of humor, but she doesn't want him to tell tasteless jokes. Kunon tries to stop her and explains that it feels like he saw colors, or more like he felt them with his magic. Once she finally lets go of him, he grabs grabs a green apple and asks her if it's red. Iko quickly calms down and tells him that it isn't red, so Kunon grabs a red apple and asks her again. Iko gives him the answer and understands that colors and their names don't correspond for him yet because he has never seen them before. Kunon is clearly confused about that now, so Iko explains that there are idioms with colors. She asks him if he can tell how many apples there are on the table, and Kunon tells her that he can tell there are 3 red apples and 2 green apples. Iko instantly praises him for giving the right answer, saying that this really is like a divine miracle, which is incredible. Without wasting any time, she immediately informs his father about it, saying that Kunon can now see colors. She clarifies that it is only in a small range, but he seems to be able to recognize colors now. The closer the item is, the clearer it is, and he can tell the color when he touches them. Kunon's father is clearly surprised by the news, and he asks her if that means he can read books now. Iko confirms this, saying that he can trace the ink to recognize the colors, and even though he hasn't learned letters yet, he's absorbed in picture books and encyclopedias. Once Kunon's father processes this information, he asks Iko to come back to the main house. She moved out since Kunon didn't want to be a bother for the others, and his wife had to tend to him non-stop, but now that could change. Iko informs him that Kunon is now trying to change drastically, and every day is a struggle. Changing his environment now might hinder Kunon from achieving his goals, so she doesn't think it's a good idea. Kunon's father quickly understands her logic, saying that she's right, and it is close enough that he can see him anytime he wants. He apologizes for putting her in a position to take care of Kunon all by herself, but Iko assures him it is totally fine because she loves working for money. Kunon's father smiles, saying that her cheerfulness might have a positive effect on his son. Iko takes the opportunity to say that rather than a compliment, she would love a raise instead, but Kunon's father only laughs at that, making his answer very clear. Sometime after that, Iko sees Kunon experimenting with magic once again, and he explains that Jinie will be here soon, so he would like to surprise her. Iko encourages him to go all out, so Kunon casts Aori, creating a huge red water ball above them. Iko praises him and says that it's a beautiful color, like the eyes of a white rabbit. Kunon is just as excited as her, and mentions that when he makes the water balls bigger, he can sense the color more strongly. He tries to admire the color he's sensing right now, but just then, his parents and brother arrive. His mother tells him that she heard the news and knows that he can see colors now. Kunon smiles and recognizes her voice right away, knowing that it's his dear mother. His sudden excitement makes him lose focus, so the huge water ball he was keeping up in the air suddenly falls on both him and Iko. After a moment of silence, Kunon completely ignores what just happened and calls his mother, covered in that bloody red color. This terrifying sight makes his mother scream in horror, and before she can understand anything, she passes out in her son's arms. Kunon's father instantly rages, asking him how he could do such a horrific thing. Kunon doesn't understand what the problem is, so Iko gladly informs him that red is also the color of human blood. Kunon's mother manages to stand back up, but her husband is still freaking out, so he tells Kunon that, as a punishment, he'll have no allowance for 2 months, and Iko's pay will be cut for 3 months. Kunon apologizes and accepts his punishment, but Iko immediately passes out when she hears that. On the other hand, Jinie observes everything in the distance, and confirms once again how frightening Kunon is, which makes her wonder how far he will go, climbing the ladder. For a moment, she thinks that he may be able to earn the title of highest honor in this world, Cerulean Sorcerer. Sometime after that, Kunon's father decides to speak to his first son, Ixio, and tells him that he's thinking about sending Kunon to the school for noble children. He knows he's never been outside of the mansion except for a handful of times since birth, and he'll be scared of strangers in the outside world, but that's why he's counting on him. Ixio hesitates for a moment because all he can remember is the time he wanted to play with his little brother, but Kunon tripped down the stairs and let go of his hand. Despite the guilt he feels at that memory, Ixio looks at his father with determination and tells him that he'll do it and he'll protect Kunon at any cost. In another scene, we see Kunon calmly reading a book, tracing the words with his finger. Iko asks him what he's reading about, and he tells her that he's reading about hydromancy. Kunon explains that he can fill a container processed with supernatural powers with water and tell fortunes or look for missing items. Iko instantly gets excited and asks him if he can look for her first flush of youth and its brilliance that she's lost. Kunon reassures her, saying that she's young and right in the middle of the bloom of youth. Iko then asks him if he can use hydromancy to find her groom-to-be, but Kunon just tells her that she's a fine woman, so men will be all over her. He also mentions that if he wasn't the second son of the Marquis, he would take her as his bride. As they joke around non-stop, Flora simply observes them with an awkward smile, wondering how they can be so cheerful. Once her lessons start, Kunon gives her the right answers, but Flora is still worried about him. She's given Kunon lectures and taught him manners as a noble gentleman, but Iko's idea of making him a gentleman with a sense of humor makes her question if she was right. A jolly man can be attractive, and that suits Kunon better, even though he may be seen as a bit shallow, but she still has her doubts. Kunon sees her lost in her thoughts and asks her what's making her look so concerned. Before she can answer, he decides to make a toast with his cup of tea, simply for looking at her. This makes Flora confirm her suspicions about him being quite shallow, but even so, compared to when she met him, she can admit that he's become a lot more adorable. Kunon gets a whiff of his cup of tea and says that it's the 12-year vintage from the New Kingdom, which is worthy of a woman as beautiful as her. Iko corrects him, informing informing him that it's actually domestic tea from Huglia, but this only makes him laugh. Flora simply observes their interactions with an awkward smile, not really knowing how to react. At night, Iko decides to guide Kunon back home, saying that Lord Gurion is waiting for him. A strong, cold wind makes her shiver in their way back, so she asks Kunon if he can do something about it. Kunon then casts Aori, creating 2 water balls with hot water to keep them warm. Iko hugs one of the water balls, enjoying how warm and squishy it is, and saying that it feels really nice to the touch. Kunon tells her that he encased water with a super soft and stretchy membrane, but it's still just a prototype. Iko says that she wants a bed of it to sleep in, and he admits that he's thinking that too. Leaving that aside, he wonders what his father would like to speak to him about, wanting to know if he did something wrong. Iko tells him that she doesn't think he's done anything to get yelled at, because he's learned his lesson from the Sea of Blood incident. Once they finally reach the manor, they're welcomed by the butler, Balin, and Kunon's older brother. Ixio walks with him through the house, and asks him if he needs him to lead him by the hand. Kunon reassures him, and explains that he's fine, because he can now sense what's around him pretty well thanks to his magic. Ixio quickly accepts this, but when he looks at Kunon, he can't help but remember the sad expression he used to have when he couldn't walk around on his own. Kunon somehow senses his gaze on him, so he asks him if anything's wrong, but Ixio simply smiles and tells him that he's glad he's doing great. After a while walking, they finally meet with their parents, who have something important to tell them. Lord Gurion tells Kunon that Flora told them he finished what they cover at the school for noble children, but he isn't interested in going to the actual school. Kunon confirms that, saying that he would hate to trouble those around him, and he has something he wants to prioritize over school. His father tells him that he's always believed he should do what his heart desires, but noble children are obligated to go to school. On paper, he is enrolled in the school for noble children, but his circumstances are special, so they have permission from the king for schooling to be optional. Kunon suddenly pauses, saying that he smells nepotism, but his father tells him that he doesn't appreciate that phrasing, and that's beside the point, so he would like him to give it some thought. Kunon asks him if he's talking about how to use his allowance, because he always complains about the way he uses it. It may seem like a waste of money to him, but he thinks he's spending it responsibly. His father tries to tell him that he's not talking about his allowance, but Kunon continues, thanking him for always working hard to provide for the family. His father asks him to leave that aside, and Kunon asks him if he's still mad at him then, for turning his garden into a sea of blood. Gurion completely loses it, raising his voice to say that that was unacceptable, and next time, he'll have no allowance for 6 months. His wife tries to make him calm down, and reminds him that they're not here to talk about that today. Once he finally calms down, Gurion clarifies that he's just asking him to think about Princess Marika. After all, those who do not fulfill their noble obligations are at a disadvantage in high society. That means that, because of him, Marika might be viewed in a negative light in the future. Kunon quickly understands the situation, and that's all it takes for him to accept. He tells his father that he's going to school, even though he thinks it's a hassle. Gurion clarifies that he's not asking him to go for years, since he just needs to take the advancement exams. Once he passes them, he will receive the official certificate of graduation, and since there are 5 exams, he only needs to go to school 5 times. Kunon is relieved to hear it's that easy, and Ixion tells him that Marika and he will graduate after the next exam, so he'll be taking it with them. Without wasting any time, Kunon's mother tells him that they have to get him ready for school, and he will need clothes, shoes, and a nice coat. She has to get his measurements, so she tells Iko that she needs her help. After they leave to get that done, Gurion warns Ixio that there are other royals at school, and they may try to approach Kunon and Marika. Ixio reassures him, saying that he will be with them to avoid any problems. Soon enough, Kunon informs Marika that he's going to school, and she's clearly very happy to hear the news. He clarifies that he'll only go for the advancement exams, but she tells him that it's wonderful, because she'll get to spend time with him at school. Kunon confesses that he doesn't really know what to expect at school, but Marika reassures him, saying that she will escort him as his elder. Kunon accepts her proposal, but he also mentions that he's worried, because if she's with him, then all the boys who are in love with her will be jealous of him. Marika nervously tells him that she's certain it will be fine, so Kunon asks her if she's not popular. That clearly offends her, so she reminds him that she's a princess, so it's clear that she's popular, and there are as many boys who like her as the number of fingers on her right hand. That makes it 5, so Kunon starts thinking about getting a new cane for self-defense. Once the day finally comes, Kunon wears a dashing attire, using a mask to cover his eyes, and a new cane for self-defense. Iko is completely excited about his new looks, saying that he looks like the model for the classic storybook prince. Kunon plays along with his charms, which makes Ixio wonder if his little brother was always this shallow. Once they get in the carriage, Kunon says goodbye to his family and casts Aori to evenly surround the wheels with water. When the carriage starts moving, Ixio is surprised to notice that it doesn't shake at all. Kunon tells him that a rough carriage is bad for their back, so he used Aori to avoid that. Ixio mentions that magic is really convenient, and Kunon agrees, saying that since it's so versatile, even he may be able to find a job in the future. After a while, Ixio says that he's sure he's nervous to travel far away from the house, but Kunon disagrees, and tells him that he's grown a bit stronger. He knows that he's worried him a lot as well, because when he fell and hurt himself, he blamed himself for that. Ixio is a little surprised that he knew that, but Kunon assures him that he's alright now. He used to wish he could just disappear, but now he's determined to survive no matter what. Ixio can't help but smile at that, realizing that his little brother truly has changed since learning magic. Kunon tells him that he has a drive that he wants to prevail even if the rest of the world perishes, so he will live. That completely takes Ixio off guard and confuses him deeply, but Kunon continues speaking, saying that he'll outlive everyone so thoroughly that he feels bad for the whole human race. Ixio simply agrees and smiles awkwardly, questioning if he really is his little brother. That aside, he's a little surprised when Kunon manages to sense that they're almost at school, because he can sense a lot of people. Once they're finally there, Mirika excitedly runs to greet them, and Kunon doesn't hesitate to use his charms. Ixio simply observes their interaction in silence, wondering what's up with these two. Mirika decides that it's time for them to go already, but she looks concerned when Kunon doesn't follow her. Kunon doesn't move from his spot, focused on the many voices he's hearing right now. The presence of countless people and endless voices are overwhelming, and he knows that his past self would have recoiled from this. However, he simply smiles and holds his hand out to Mirika, asking her if he can become a girl just for now. Mirika plays along without questioning him, taking his hand and saying that she'll become a boy then. Ixio decides not to question them anymore at this point, despite how confused he is. In the meantime, Cast, a professor of the school, is seemingly waiting for Kunon's arrival, and she's clearly worried about it too. He's the second son of the Marquis, with the hero's scar, and she's heard rumors that he's a shy boy. She can't help but worry, wondering if a novice teacher like her can handle the job of showing him around. Her thoughts are interrupted when she hears some girls talking about a boy so charming like a prince. That's when she sees Kunon for the first time, being escorted by Mirika and his older brother. When they walk past her, she quickly snaps out of it and says his name, stopping him before he can leave. Cass tells him that she's a professor at this school, and she'll be his guide today. Kunon decides to introduce himself properly, but confuses her when he says that he's a girl right now. Cass is clearly lost, so Kunon explains that he's biologically a boy, with a personality of a boy, but today, he's a beautiful day. That statement does nothing to clear her confusion, but before she can question him any further, the bell rings, and Mirika and Ixio have to go. Cass says goodbye with a smile, but when she's left alone with Kunon, she has the feeling that this will be a lot of work. Mirika says goodbye to Kunon, and a group of students observes this from one of the classrooms, mentioning that he is the hero's scar. One of them says that he heard he received blessings from the king as the first hero's scar born in 100 years. Prince Lyle immediately makes a face when he hears that, so his classmates quickly clarify that Kunon doesn't look like a big deal, and the hero's scar might be just an unfounded superstition. Despite their attempts to fix the situation, when Lyle sees Mirika smiling at Kunon, he's clearly angrier than before. Soon after that, Cass takes Kunon to a classroom and asks him if he heard the overview of the advancement exams. Kunon confirms this, saying that he was told that if he passes 5 exams, he can receive the certificate of graduation. Cass explains that normally, after taking an exam, there will be a period of time to prepare for the next. As an exception, his exams will be held in a shorter period, since she's received orders from his father and the king to do so. Kunon pauses, and with a serious expression, he tells her that his father and the king are besties, so this is nepotism, and he wants to apologize for pressuring the school to do this. Cass clearly wasn't expecting that, so she simply says that she's going to pretend she didn't hear that. However, Kunon continues speaking, saying that he heard these things happen all the time in high society. Cass doesn't say anything and places the exam sheets on his desk, telling him that he's free to tell her if anything is unclear. Kunon continues, saying that his father and the king are as thick as thieves. Cass nervously tries to ignore his comments and asks him not to involve her in a political mess. Kunon keeps pushing and says that this relationship has been going on since the previous generation, but Cass immediately interrupts him and asks him to start the exam. After the bell rings, Cass goes to the teacher's room to check his answers in the exam. She never expected Kunon to continue chit-chatting for the whole exam, and she surely expected him to fail because of that, but he actually got everything right in all the subjects, which doesn't make sense to her. In the meantime, Kunon starts feeling hungry, so he decides to go to the cafeteria with Mirika. However, they suddenly run into Prince Lyle and his classmates, and Mirika almost instantly shrinks in place. Everyone near the place goes silent, and the air quickly fills with tension, which makes Kunon wonder what's happening. Lyle mocks Kunon and asks if a brat like him really received blessings from his father. Mirika tries to defend Kunon from her older brother, but Lyle asks her to stay out of it. Kunon's grip on his cane tightens, and he says that he doesn't care who it is, but if he agonizes Mirika and gets in their way, he can't ignore it. His threat suddenly gets interrupted by Ixio, who stands between them and nervously asks Lyle if he wants something with his little brother. Lyle is clearly not happy about his intervention, so he complains about how disrespectful this is, since he didn't give him permission to speak. Ixio hesitates nervously, and he can't believe that his little brother and Mirika were approached by royalty on the first day. He doesn't understand anything, and he clearly doesn't know what to do, but Kunon decides to do something first and silently casts Aori. With his magic, he gathers all the water he can find at the cafeteria without anyone noticing and uses it to soak Lyle's pants. Ixio nervously reminds him that status is supposed to be irrelevant at school, so they should smooth things over. Lyle clearly doesn't agree with him, but Kunon interrupts them to say that the prince wet himself. Only then, Lyle looks down at his soaked pants, and everyone starts whispering things. Lyle instantly feels embarrassed embarrassed and tries to deny it, not understanding what just happened. On the other hand, Ixio already has an idea of what happened, and he knows Kunon is involved. Feeling exposed and humiliated, Lyle decides to run away, and his classmates follow him. Kunon just smiles victoriously, saying that a nuisance is gone now. He easily leaves that aside to speak about what he'll have for lunch, and mentions that he wants a hamburger. Ixio immediately stops him to address the elephant in the room, asking him if he did that to the prince. Kunon completely ignores his question with a smile, and asks Marika what she'll have for lunch. Marika knows better than to question him, so she decides to simply sit with them at lunch. Once they get their food, Kunon finally asks about Lyle, and Marika informs him that he's her brother, 6th Prince Lyle Huglia. Kunon is shocked to know that they're siblings, because he thought there can't be a big brother who doesn't cherish his little siblings. Marika tells him that she wishes that were true, but it clearly isn't, and Ixio confirms this. Kunon then tells Ixio that he's glad he's his big brother, and once again, Ixio realizes that his little brother really has changed. However, they also acted so out of line to someone so untouchable, so he doesn't know how he should report this to his father. Kunon simply enjoys his food without worrying about anything, so Marika laughs and says that rambling about it is not going to change a thing. Her reassurance does nothing to ease Ixio's worries, so he just hopes they can graduate without any further incident. Kunon asks Marika why Lyle stood in front of them in such a wild manner without trying to hide his ferocious violence. Ixio asks him not to say it like he encountered a monster, but Marika ignores that and explains that it was probably to keep her in check. After all, Lyle is the 6th prince, and she's the 9th princess, so she's below him in the royal hierarchy. However, she's engaged to Kunon, the hero's scar and a sorcerer, so her status is rapidly rising. Now that Kunon has made his debut into society, from now on, their status will be above Lyle in high society. Kunon mentions that it sounds complicated, but Marika smiles reassuringly and tells him that with or without her father's order and their status in high society, she's happy to be betrothed to him. Kunon agrees, saying that the next time he meets with the king, he might kneel in gratitude. For now, he'd like to go apologize to Prince Lyle, but both Ixio and Marika ask him not to do that. Time goes by rather quickly, and the day of the final exam finally arrives, so Kunon decides to train his magic in the morning. Genier asks him to try changing the sensation for today's Aori alteration, so the first thing Kunon does is turning a water ball into ice. However, when Genier holds it in her hand, she says that it feels like an apple, so she asks him to try touching other things and expressing their sensation. Kunon takes that as a task, and when he goes to school, he tries touching different things, including a horse. Ixio asks him what he's working on now, and Kunon explains that he's collecting samples for alterations. Of course, Ixio has no idea what he's talking about, but he doesn't question him any further. Marika runs to them to greet them, and Kunon instantly kneels before her, saying that he's sad that today's his last day to hear her voice at school. She reminds him that school ends in the evening, so Kunon tells her that he's not sad anymore. That simply makes her laugh, and Ixio still doesn't understand any of them, but he knows that they're completely something else. Once in school, Cast informs Kunon that he will take the final exam with the other students. Now Kunon feels like he's in an actual school, unlike before, but he says that it's a shame that he's no longer in a special room with Professor Cast. Cast lets him know that she's watching him, even if they have many other students, so she wishes him the best of luck. Ixio mentions that they seem very close now, and Kunon explains that they talked a lot during the exams. She told him about how she became a teacher, following a man she was in love with to the senior school for nobles. However, he failed the test, and only she became a teacher, so she's now on her 2nd year. Cast doesn't deny the story, saying that she was young, and she currently doesn't know what she's doing. Both Ixio and Marika smile awkwardly, not knowing how to react after hearing that, and wondering why a teacher would discuss that with a child during the exam no less. Before they can say anything, a group of students approaches them and ask Marika to introduce her fiancé to them. Even though he's a little surprised at first, Kunon decides to introduce himself, saying that he's engaged to Princess Marika Huglia and he's Ixio Gurion's little brother. He confesses that he's actually relieved now because he was starting to wonder if Marika and his brother had no friends, because no one would approach and talk to them. Clearly embarrassed, Marika explains that it was because she asked them to leave them alone, since this was a rare opportunity for her to enjoy her school life with him. Kunon quickly understands and tells her that he appreciates her thoughtfulness. However, he clarifies that it is true that he was worried, but it would have been rude to ask if they didn't have any friends, or if they were usually always alone. Now he's glad to know that his brother isn't lonely, and he's really glad that Marika has friends. And he's so happy that he didn't have to console them by reminding them of his situation and saying that it is fine not to have friends. Everyone goes silent at that, but Marika smiles and says that he totally is fine not having friends. Kunon quickly agrees, saying that humans do surprisingly okay being alone. In another scene, we see Lyle stubbornly staring out the window, and his classmates inform him that it's time for the exam. Lyle simply tells them that professors can wait, but his friends remind him that the final exam will be conducted all at once, so even the prince isn't allowed to be late. Once the bell rings, Cast asks everyone to take their seats, and Marika decides to sit next to Kunon. However, Lyle suddenly stands between them, and he's clearly pissed off. Even though he hasn't said a word yet, all the students in the classroom start whispering things, and Ixio remembers the rumors he heard from the maid maids who said that the prince caused trouble at school before. Apparently, imperial studies couldn't be extended to the 6th prince. Lyle has also heard a lot of things about himself, but since he's still a prince, no one says anything to his face, and they talk behind his back all the time. That's why he's angry all the time, because the people at the castle and at this school are all the same. His thoughts are suddenly interrupted when Kunon holds his hands, saying that it is nice to meet him. Kunon excitedly introduces himself as Marika's fiancé and tells him that he's really happy to get a chance to say hi, since he didn't really get to the other day. Lyle gets a little freaked out and asks what's wrong with him, but Kunon continues shaking his hand and explains that he's his future brother-in-law. Lyle tries to pull away and asks him to stop messing with him, but Kunon's grip is strong and he doesn't let go. That's why Lyle harshly reminds him that he never gave him permission to speak or to hold his hand. Kunon simply smiles and ignores his warning, saying that he has a really manly voice, and he can tell from the feel of his hand that his face must also be manly. Without hesitation, Kunon tells him that if his eyes could see, he would have stared a hole through his manly face already. That comment takes Lyle off guard, making him feel flustered and nervous. Not knowing how to react, Lyle asks his sister what's wrong with Kunon, but Marika simply laughs, saying that she never knew that he could get flustered and blush like that. Lyle quickly denies that he's blushing and tells Kunon that he needs to let go already. Kunon finally releases him and says that he's glad that he understands now, and this time, Lyle has nothing to say to him. Ixio sighs in relief, and Cast asks everyone to take their seats once again, because the final exam is about to start. Later that day, Cast informs them that she'll announce those who pass the final exam. All the students observe her patiently as she draws a big flower on the board and tells them that they all passed. Everyone cheers, and Ixio approaches his little brother to tell him that he's glad he passed. Marika smiles and tells him that they're graduating together, so Kunon congratulates her as well. Soon after that, Kunon says goodbye to Marika and the other students, saying that he hopes that their paths will cross again. Cast smiles, thinking to herself that he was a bit quirky, but a bright, wonderful student. As they leave, Kunon asks her to think about dating his older brother if she's still looking for a boyfriend, because that way they will see each other again in no time. Ixio asks him to stop that, and Cast realizes that she's said a little too much, and she's had her heart broken by a graduate for no reason. Meanwhile, Lyle observes Kunon leave from inside the school, but instead of his always angry expression, he's finally smiling for once. When Kunon returns home, he continues his class with Jeunie, who asks him to use Aori to create a whirlpool. Kunon follows her instructions and easily gets it right in no time, so Jeunie asks him to make a sudden stop and split it into 10. Once he does that, she quickly instructs him to turn them red, blue, and green, and to change the texture afterward. Kunon manages to do all that she instructs, and Jeunie praises him for his good work. However, before she can end the class, Kunon tells her that he's made alterations by adding shape and temperature to the texture. To demonstrate this, he uses Aori to create a real-looking bird that leaves the place flying. Jeunie falls on her knees from the shock, knowing that it's over for good now. Once she calms down, Jeunie tells him that his graduation gives her a perfect opportunity to tell him the truth. Kunon doesn't know what she's talking about, so she asks him to mentally prepare himself because she's going to reveal a shocking truth now. Iko decides to leave them alone, and Jeunie finally reveals the truth to him, but she clearly wasn't expecting his reaction. Kunon dramatically tells her that he can't believe that she's actually the goddess of the night sky, and that she must return to the world of gods soon. Jeunie smiles and tells him that she personally loves that story, but that's not the case at all. She confesses that the truth is that there is nothing she can teach him anymore. It's actually been quite a while that she's had nothing else to teach him, and she's taught him everything she could in the range of elementary magic with no attacking ability. Now he's using magic better than she is, so once he learns new magic, he will surpass her in no time. Kunon suddenly stands up and tells her that that's not true, because he loved the little magic tricks she's come up with, trying to deceive him with every possible method. Just then, Jeunie realizes that he was actually aware that she was desperate, and that makes things easier. Kunon confirms this, saying that her tricks out of desperation definitely broadened his range of magic. She's the one who gave him a purpose in life, the day he realized that he could try to create his own eyes with magic. It was her little tricks that taught him the depths of magic as well. Jeunie keeps a smile on her face, but she tells him that if he truly feels that way, then he should stop calling them little tricks. She also explains that she had to rack her brain to squeeze them out, and there were many times she struggled to come up with one. Kunon doesn't believe her and asks her if the problem is her salary, assuming that she wants to quit because the pay is low. Jeunie loses her patience and snaps, telling him that it's the opposite, because it's unbearable to get paid so much when she has no job to fulfill, and she has hit her limit now. Jeunie tries to calm down and places her hands on his shoulders to make him listen for once. She tells him that he should have an exceptional sorcerer who's much better than her as his teacher, because she can't help him improve any further. She's managed to make it work with his lessons, but it's over now, so she can't guide him anymore. Kunon tells her that even if they're little tricks, if she can think up so many of them, then it's a respectable talent, so he wants her to deceive him more, because he wants her to be his teacher. Kunon insists, asking her to make it work, but despite how hard he tries, Jeunie tells him that she can't do it anymore. After all, his magic is far more advanced than hers now. Despite that, Kunon tells her that he really likes her little tricks, but Jeunie once again asks him to stop calling them that if he truly likes them. In the end, Jeunie leaves the mansion, knowing knowing that Kunon is an unmistakable genius, so maybe he has what it takes to become the cerulean sorcerer. Even Kunon, with God-given talents, went through endless trial and error and challenged himself to overcome it all. That's why she knows that she can't lose to her pupil, because it's not too late for her either. Later that day, Kunon finds out that Flora has also resigned because he finished his curriculum and officially graduated from the school for noble children. He's a little disappointed that he didn't say goodbye, but Iko explains that Flora said that she wouldn't be able to hold back tears to say goodbye in person. Kunon says that he'll have to write a letter of thanks in that case, and Iko tells him that Flora would love that. She also tells him that while he's at it, he could ask if there's a male servant who's between 18 and 25 years old, well-paid, tall, and good-looking in her manner. Kunon already knows that she's talking about her groom-to-be, so he asks her if she would leave him and get married. Iko wipes a fake tear from her face and tells him that it pains her to be parted from him, but she'd like to get married. She also knows that he'll be perfectly fine on his own now, so there's nothing to worry about. Kunon tells her that he won't be perfectly fine because everyone is leaving him now, and there's an old wives' tale that a bunny dies when it feels too lonely. Iko has actual tears in her eyes now, and Kunon stubbornly tells her that he won't ask about a male servant who's between 18 and 25 years old, well-paid, and good-looking. That night, while they're having dinner as a family, Kunon informs his father about Geni's decision and mentions that she told him to find an exceptional sorcerer for his teacher. Ixio tells him that he heard a rumor at school that there's an extraordinary royal sorcerer. His father tries to stop him from speaking any further, but Ixio mentions that girls especially were making a fuss about that sorcerer, though he doesn't remember the name. His mother asks him if they were perhaps talking about Xionli Finrol, and Ixio confirms it, saying that he's apparently a sorcerer of immense power and beauty. Kunon doesn't need to hear anything else, and says that he'd like him to be his new teacher. However, his father, Arsene, suddenly snaps, asking him to hold on. Everyone at the table goes quiet, and he explains that it is impossible to invite a royal sorcerer here. Kunon asks him if it really is impossible, even for him, who's favored by and collusively connected with the king. Arsene doesn't know who's feeding him these things, though he assumes it is most likely Iko. He explains that royal sorcerer also refers to a title within the royal court, so other than the king and those under his chain of command, no one can give orders to them. They rarely leave the castle, and outside of royalty, getting in touch with them is also severely restricted. Kunon quickly understands that meeting with them is difficult, let alone inviting him here. His father confirms that and thinks that the conversation is finally over, but after a few seconds of thinking, Kunon tells him that he could accompany him when he visits the castle, in that case, by some means or another, and when he gets lost, the royal sorcerers who happen to be there will help him, and by some means or another, he'll become their apprentice. His father simply asks him how he can present such a vague, flawed plan so confidently. Kunon assures him that it is actually an elaborate plan with 90% success rate, but his father tells him that the success rate is less than 10%. He also would never use something like by some means or another in an elaborate plan, and definitely not twice. Kunon's expression turns sad at that, because he really thought that his plan was perfect. He asks her mother for reassurance, and seeing his adorable face, she can't help but agree, saying that Kunon is perfect. Ixio knows that his mother is indulging Kunon, but he doesn't say anything about it. Kunon's mother uses her charms and asks her husband if he can do something, because Kunon is practically begging him. Arsene definitely can't resist her charms, so he finally gives in, saying that he will at least ask the king next the time he sees him. Ixio knows that his father is now indulging his mother, but he decides to remain silent. Kunon, on the other hand, happily thanks his father, clearly satisfied with the result. His father asks him not to get his hopes up anyway, but he reassures his wife and tells her that he'll make it happen. In another scene, we see Marika's older sister bringing a document about Kunon to the Grand Master. He mentions that an apprentice-level sorcerer asking to study a royal sorcerer is unheard of, even for a noble close to the king. The princess tells him that power and status mean nothing to royal sorcerers, but her little sister, Marika, is head over heels for this tiny sorcerer named Kunon. Having that in mind, and reading the document in his hands, the Grand Master gives it some thought. He suddenly stands up from his seat in surprise, and his eyes light up when he realizes that they are actually talking about Kunon Gurion, the hero's scar. Soon enough, Kunon and his father head to the palace after receiving permission to meet him alone, which was a surprise for both of them. His father clarifies that if things go well, the king will consider the request for a magic tutor. Kunon excitedly says that it's an impressive power of collusion, but Arsene sighs and clarifies that that's not what this is. He informs him that the royal sorcerers apparently took an interest in him, and that's why they received this permission. That aside, his father asks him what kind of magic he learned recently, and Kunon uses his Aori spell to create a real-looking cat. His father gets really excited about the cat, and Kunon tells him that initially it was transparent, but now he can even do white or calico. Arsene can't believe that this cute cat is truly just water, and he thinks that magic sure is a wonder. Kunon tells him that some motions are still unnatural, but he wants to study more, and is hoping to reproduce the sounds they make. His father doesn't respond this time, because he's too engrossed in petting the cat. Kunon asks him if he likes cats that much, and even though Arsene tries to deny it, he asks him why he doesn't have a real cat. His father immediately refuses, saying that if something like this was at home, he'd never get any any work done. Kunon tells him that if he leverages the wealth and power of the Guryons, he's sure he can collect cute cats from all over the world. His father stands firm on his decision, saying that they will not keep any cats or animals in their household because they can't have them running around his feet and making him trip. Kunon knows that his father just cares about his safety, but he assures him that he doesn't need to worry about him anymore. Arson also mentions that his wife prefers dogs, and Kunon understands that he's thinking of their family. He thanks him for the information and asks him what he thinks about keeping cats outside. After all, Iko told him that keeping cats outside is a sign of a certain status among nobles, and apparently bringing them inside is considered crude. His father is left a little confused at that, and he now wonders if Iko was actually talking about cats. Kunon clarifies that Mirika agreed, so they clearly were really talking about cats. His father thinks about it for a moment, and he starts thinking that it may not be a bad idea. Once they finally arrive at the castle, Mirika's older sister, Reisha Huglia, welcomes them. Arson is still holding the cat Kunon created, and he thanks her for coming to greet them. Kunon immediately uses his charms to introduce himself, saying that he's honored to meet her. His father quickly informs him that Reisha is the second princess, so he must greet her properly. Kunon gets even more excited, realizing that she's his future sister-in-law, so he's really happy to see her. Reisha properly introduces herself, and mentions that Mirika has told her a lot about him. After the introductions, Reisha addresses the fact that they brought a cat, because she thinks it's adorable. Arson carefully puts the cat down, and Kunon turns it into its original form, so all that's left is a puddle of water. Reisha is really surprised by this, though his father is heartbroken because he didn't even get to name the cat. Kunon informs her that it was magic, and just then, Reisha realizes that he's more skilled than she's heard. Arson is still feeling sad for his loss, but Reisha informs him that she'll take Kunon to the Black Tower. He quickly recovers his composure and thanks her, mentioning that he will have an audience with the king. Kunon tells him that he can get home by himself because he wants to see Mirika too. His father says that he'll arrange a carriage for him in that case, so he can enjoy his time. Kunon thanks him and clarifies that he actually reserved an auspicious restaurant, the one where his father managed to win his mother over. Arson gets a little embarrassed and asks him to go already, so Kunon quickly follows the second princess. While they're walking, Reisha tells him that the Black Tower is on the other side of the castle and asks him if he's comfortable walking. Kunon tells her that he's perfectly fine and asks her if she'll tell him about the essence of sorcerers while they walk. Reisha denies it, saying that she's still new, so there's not a lot she can say about that. Kunon excitedly asks her if she'll talk about a new interpretation of compound magic then, or the way to apply the old interpretation to the new one, or perhaps the new theory on three-dimensional and oblique magic circles. Reisha quickly stops him, saying that she can't have such high-level conversations while walking. Once Kunon finally calms down, Reisha mentions that he surely heard from Mirika that there are 7 princes and 10 princesses. The throne goes to the first prince in most countries, but in Huglia, they lean toward meritocracy, which means that, depending on achievement, the birth order can be overturned. Kunon mentions that he's heard it's complicated, and Reisha affirms it, but clarifies that she relinquished her right to the throne to be a sorcerer. As they talk, Kunon suddenly stops in his tracks and looks out the window, sensing a lot of magical powers coming from that direction. Reisha continues speaking, saying that Mirika is concerned that he might get dragged into the issue of royal succession. She immediately stops talking when Kunon simply slides past her using some sort of magic. Reisha asks him what he's doing, and Kunon explains that he created a very thin layer of water on his shoes and froze it, so it's like an ice sleigh, which is faster than walking. Reisha clearly wants to try that, but before they do anything, she tells him that he shouldn't affiliate with a faction carelessly, and he must not sign or say anything that can be used against him. Once that's clear, Reisha excitedly asks him to let her skate too, and Kunon gladly creates that very thin layer of ice on her shoes as well. Soon enough, they're both skating through the halls of the castle, while Kunon guides her and says that the trick is to float just a little. Even though they're having a lot of fun skating around, all the personnel of the castle get concerned. The guards soon start chasing after the second princess, saying that it's dangerous for her to do that. Despite their efforts, they give up midway after running out of breath, and that's when a knight named Dario comes out to ask them what's going on. Once he finds out, Dario immediately chases after them and asks them to stop. Kunon hesitates for a moment, but Reisha is still having fun, so she just asks him to go faster. Unfortunately, Dario is clearly way faster than the guards, so he manages to catch them in no time. Both Reisha and Kunon have no choice but to apologize for what they did, like two little kids after being scolded. Somewhere else in the castle, Arson is peacefully enjoying some tea, wondering what the commotion is. The butler informs him that a child sorcerer made mischief and got caught by a knight, and that makes Arson spit out his tea. When Kunon and Reisha finally reach the Black Tower, the Grand Master of the Royal Sorcerers, Londemond Achtard, welcomes them. Kunon introduces himself as well, but this time, he's clearly very tense. After all, he thought Reisha's magic was impressive, but the Grand Master's magic is on a whole different level. The Grand Master mentions that he heard he has a water crest, and Kunon confirms it, saying that it's on his left shoulder. After taking a look, the Grand Master sees that it's a 2-star crest, and explains that there are 7 types of crests borne by sorcerers. There's fire, water, earth, wind, light, darkness, and foul, and each crest has 5 ranks. Kunon then assumes that his is water, second from the bottom. The Grand Master confirms it, saying that statistically, 2 stars are the most common. Reisha mentions that she's also a 2-star of the wind, so Kunon assumes that the Grandmaster isn't, saying that the density of his magical power is completely different. The Grandmaster admits that that's an interest description, and Kunon tells him that if the magical powers of Reisha and he are regular cheese, then his is like premium blue cheese, which is probably a 3-star. The Grandmaster tells him that he'll be mad if he calls him that again, and clarifies that he's actually a 4-star. Kunon is not that surprised, and mentions that it's his first time hearing about crests, so it's not really sinking in. After thinking about it for a bit, Kunon asks him if the difference in ranks influences the magic one can wield. The Grandmaster tells him that there's no clear categorization, and the only clear distinction they know of is the total amount of magical power. What matters is what he'll learn from now and how devoted he is. Once that's clear, the Grandmaster decides to move on, wanting to let the fun time begin already. Kunon has no idea what he's talking about, but soon enough, he's outside the Black Tower, surrounded by sorcerers. The Grandmaster lets him know that he's fascinated by him, so he wants to give him a test. Everyone is excited to see what kind of magic he uses, because he's the hero's Scar, and they heard he gave none other than Dario a hard time. Kunon wonders if this means a royal sorcerer can come be his teacher if he passes the test. Having this in mind, he asks the Grandmaster to begin, and a sorcerer named Victo steps forward. After the Grandmaster gives him the order, Victo uses Aori to create several small water balls around himself. Once he does that, the Grandmaster asks Kunon if he can conquer these water balls with his Aori. Kunon is taken by surprise by the concept of conquering magic with magic, because he never thought about that before. Jinni taught him that Aori is magic to produce and manipulate water, but it can also control water that's already there. Kunon has controlled water many times before, but manipulating the water another sorcerer created is completely different. The Grandmaster sees his hesitation and asks him if something's wrong. Kunon remains frozen in place because the Grandmaster nonchalantly gave him an assignment neither Genie nor him could come up with. Despite feeling unsure, Kunon decides to accept the new challenge and uses Aori to try to conquer Victo's magic. This is clearly not an easy task because he's never experienced water that resists before. Even though it's his first time, Kunon concentrates and makes a big effort trying to move Victo's water balls. After trying hard enough, 2 of the water balls start moving slightly, and the Grandmaster immediately asks him to stop, saying that that's enough. Kunon is left exhausted, feeling powerless after seeing what a real royal sorcerer is like. Even though he feels defeated, the Grandmaster praises him, saying that he's very good indeed. Victo agrees, because he didn't expect him to take any, and he even asks the Grandmaster if he can have Kunon. The other sorcerers immediately protest, and even Reisha disapproves, saying that he just got dumped by his girlfriend. Victo feels clearly offended, and he doesn't see what that has to do with this, but the other sorcerers tell him that he can't even look after himself. The Grandmaster simply laughs, mentioning that everyone seems to want Kunon now. Kunon asks him if that means he passed the test, but the Grandmaster asks him to try a few more things, because he'd like to experience his magic too. Kunon gladly agrees, and in no time, the Grandmaster is having the time of his life, bouncing on a giant water ball covered in a stretchy membrane. That's the Grandmaster of the Royal Sorcerers with a 4-star crest, so he feels like he's looking at something he shouldn't. The other sorcerers try to make the Grandmaster hurry, because they want to have their turn as well. The Grandmaster ignores their complaints and asks Kunon what this is, so Kunon explains that it's a super soft body Aori. He encased water in a super soft and super stretchy membrane, which helps absorb the shock of a fall. The Grandmaster finally comes down from it and tells him that he hasn't had this much fun with a magic test in years. Kunon informs him that if he increases the elasticity, he can jump so high that he can easily reach the 2nd floor of the castle. Everyone is excited with that idea, but the Grandmaster quickly asks him not to do that, because if he shows them any more magic, he won't be able to go home tonight. Kunon apologizes, saying that he has dinner with his fiancée, so he can't stay with them. The Grandmaster says that that's a shame, but Reisha leaves that aside and asks him if he can make other animals than cats. She also asks him if he can make humans, so Kunon decides to show her, using Aori to create a water doll with Iko's appearance. He clarifies that, just like animals, their movements are still imperfect. Victo assumes that that means, if his magic allows, it's possible to have human-like motion or make it move in ways humans can't. Kunon affirms that and mentions that he tried letting it fly as an experiment once, but it wasn't very pleasant to watch. Despite this, the Grandmaster and Reisha excitedly tell him that they want to see it. Kunon decides to please them, but one of the maids in the castle freaks out when she sees a body falling from the sky outside. Kunon does this over and over again, so a lot of the people in the castle complain. Dario scolds them once again, and this time, all the sorcerers, including the Grandmaster, have to apologize. All the sorcerers blame Victo, and Kunon feels bad that he got scolded twice today. The Grandmaster tells him that feeling down isn't going to change anything, so next time, they should discuss magic over lunch. Kunon asks him if that means he passed, and the Grandmaster tells him that there's no need to ask after how much fun he had. He will personally take care of assigning a sorcerer to be his teacher, so he doesn't have to worry anymore. Kunon immediately cheers, but he quickly asks if this will imply he supports a specific royal faction. Reisha reassures him and tells him that it won't, because power and status mean nothing to royal sorcerers. The Grandmaster then asks him if he has a future goal, and Kunon tells him that his goal is to create eyeballs with magic. The other sorcerers find that very impressive and intriguing, and and the Grand Master definitely approves. By the end of the day, Arson shows up, clearly not happy because he heard about his son's bad reputation twice today. Kunon tries to apologize, but Reisha quickly says that Kunon is not to blame since they all got carried away. Arson disagrees, saying that regardless of the situation, those who use magic should always be held accountable for their actions. Hurting someone because they're told to do so and killing people because they're ordered to do so are things that should never be allowed. Magic is power, so no matter who commands him, he must refuse if it can bring harm to others, because as long as he wields power, he is responsible. Kunon feels the weight of his father's words, so he takes responsibility and apologizes. Once Arson finally leaves, Reisha asks Kunon if he has to go get Mirika now. Kunon gets a little surprised and asks her if it really is that late, and Reisha lets him know that it's starting to get dark. That quickly makes him worry, because it'd be ungentlemanly of him to greet Mirika all sweaty and out of breath after running late. Seeing the problem, Reisha suggests combining their magic in that case, though he really doesn't understand at first. Soon enough, he creates a super soft body Aori again, and they both get on it, while Reisha reminds him that she has a wind crest, so if they fly this with her wind, they can get to Mirika's in no time. Kunon admits that it's an interesting experiment, though he doesn't think it's a good idea. After all, he promised himself that the first time he flies or floats alone with someone, it'd be with Princess Mirika. He's sure Reisha's fiancé will misunderstand as well, and he'll blame her for flying alone with a man. Reisha dismisses all his concerns and drags Kunon with her, saying that she doesn't have a fiancé. Kunon knows that he has no choice, so he allows her to make them float with her wind magic. In a matter of seconds, they're both shot into the sky at high speed, and that takes Kunon off guard. Reisha reassures him and decides to go even faster until they finally reach their destination. Kunon thanks her, but just then, the soft water ball instantly falls, though it fortunately absorbs the shock from the fall. Reisha apologizes, saying that she should have gradually decreased speed and altitude. Kunon reassures her this time, saying that now they know it can fly, and Reisha tells him that they need to experiment more. However, just as she says that, Dario appears in front of them, ready to scold them a third time today for being so reckless. Both Reisha and Kunon know what's coming, so they decide to apologize beforehand. In the meantime, Mirika focuses on making herself look presentable, wondering if Kunon will like the color of her outfit. Her personal maid reassures her, saying that he'll surely like it because it's her favorite color. Deep down, the maid wonders what kind of gentleman Kunon Gurion is to make the princess head over heels like this. Once she's ready, Mirika just starts nervously pacing around, unable to relax as she waits for Kunon. The maid, Laura, tries to ask her to calm down, but she doesn't blame her, since this is her first date outside the castle. When they let her know that someone has arrived, Mirika is suddenly calm and composed as always, wondering who it could be. Laura is taken off guard by her sudden shift in behavior, but she lets her know that Kunon has finally arrived. Not letting her finish, Mirika walks and almost runs just to go see Kunon. Once they finally meet, Kunon greets her with his charms, saying that the moon surely is beautiful tonight, even though he can't see it, because this is their first night out. He mentions that he was the princess at school, but he will escort her today, so he hopes she can give him her hand. Mirika is more than smitten by this, and she gladly lets him take her hand, while Laura quickly catches up to see who Kunon Gurion is. Once at the restaurant, Kunon makes a toast to the beautiful blue of her eyes and her dress. Laura is pleased to see his gentlemanly poise and behavior, and there's no wonder he stole Princess Mirika's heart. Mirika mentions the fact that he visited the Black Tower today, and Kunon confirms it, saying that he met her sister, Reisha, and every one of them was impressive there. The magical power of the Grand Master Blue Cheese, especially, was just like her full coiffure. Laura remains silent in the background, internally wondering if that's truly the right metaphor. Kunon excitedly mentions that he passed the test as well, and even though he hasn't heard who his magic teacher will be, he's sure they'll arrange it nicely, just like her sharp nails with beautiful colors and shapes. He also tells Mirika that he's listened to so many interesting stories, though her stories are of course more engaging. Laura starts getting a little weirded out by the way he speaks, but even though he's a bit strange, she recognizes that Mirika looks happy when she's with him, so it doesn't matter at all. Kunon's tone suddenly becomes more serious as he tells Mirika that right now, a dinner like this is the best he can do. However, when they get married, they'll spend time together like this every day, and he can't wait for the future where he'll be walking by her side to come. Laura immediately takes back what she said, realizing that Kunon is indeed quite an exceptional boy. Mirika keeps her composure and answers with a smile, but later that night in her room, she's screaming and kicking her feet in excitement. The next day, Iko asks Kunon for help with her chores, and this time, he uses a different spell called Arubu. This creates a bunch of soap bubbles, which Iko uses to get the dirt off the laundry very well. Kunon complains that she just called him for that, and mentions that he was in the middle of writing a report. Iko scolds him, saying that he's been shutting himself in his room since he returned from the castle. He clarifies that he wants to write it down before he forgets, but Iko tells him that going outside and spending time in the sun is one of his important jobs as a child, and it can affect his growth. Kunon just then realizes that women prefer tall men, and Iko admits that some do, but she likes him whether he's tall or short. That comment makes him happy, but Kunon doesn't return the compliment, saying that he doesn't want to be rude to Princess Mirika. He decides to listen to Iko's advice, though, and stays outside with her for a while. Kunon asks asks her if a letter ever came for him, and when Iko denies it, he confirms that they haven't decided who his teacher will be yet. Meanwhile, at the Black Tower, Victo prepares himself before entering an office, hoping he can come back safely. As soon as he opens the door, a huge pile of paperwork falls on the floor, and Zeonli Finroll emerges from all the scattered documents. He's clearly not happy that Victo dared to interfere with his precious sleeping time. This is exactly why Victo didn't want to come, but he lets him know that the Grand Master is calling for him. Soon after that, Kunon is happy to know that his new teacher has been assigned, and it's a sorcerer named Zeonli Finroll, the person his brother and mother were talking about. Iko gets even more excited than him, and asks him if he's talking about the Master Zeonli, who is rumored to be a magnificently gorgeous sorcerer. Kunon is surprised that she knows him, and Iko clarifies that every woman in Huglia does. She completely freaks out, wondering what to do, and saying that she needs to ask for a new maid outfit from his father, and she has to put on makeup. Kunon tries to speak, but his words don't get to her this time, and Iko continues freaking out, saying that she needs to do her nails, her hair, and lose weight. She leaves in panic before he can say a word, desperately wanting to put herself together. The next day, Reisha asks Mirika to go to Kunon's house, since a royal sorcerer must have a direct order from royalty to go outside, and guarding her should be a good enough reason. Reisha still complains, wondering why Zeonli got chosen, since she wanted to be Kunon's teacher too. As they walk through the halls of the castle, they casually run into the sisters, Everil and Ledalia. The two of them speak to Marika in a derogatory way, saying that they heard that her fiancé has an impressive reputation, unlike herself. Reisha keeps her composure and assures them that he's an excellent sorcerer, but that has nothing to do with them. The sisters take that as an offense, but Reisha doesn't waste time with them and asks them to get out of the way. Everil and Ledalia quickly leave, not without asking Reisha not to get cocky, because she was reprimanded by the knight 3 times. Reisha is surprised that they know that, but she asks Mirika not to worry, and goes back to complaining about Zeonli getting chosen as Kunon's teacher. Kunon patiently waits for them, wondering what his teacher is like, and Iko can't possibly contain her excitement. When the carriage finally arrives, he's clearly surprised to know that Mirika is here to visit him. He confesses that he mentally prepares himself every time he sees her, so seeing her unexpectedly, he's lost for words from being nervous. As Kunon showers her with compliments, as usual, Zeonli decides to get out of the carriage. Kunon asks Mirika if she changed her perfume, since it feels more mature and lovely now. Mirika clarifies that they tell her that she's too young for perfume, so she doesn't have any on, though she did change her soap. Kunon affirms that that must be it, since it has a mature yet floral scent, so he feels like a butterfly drawn to a flower right now. He immediately stops talking as soon as Zeonli steps out of the carriage, sensing his strong presence. Iko internally freaks out and screams, but she keeps a professional stance on the outside. Kunon is completely speechless and impressed, because Zeonli's magical power is really dense, and it's sticky as well, almost like honey. It's a totally different type of magical power than Grandmaster Blue Cheese, so he's more proficient in magic than any of the royal sorcerers that he met at the castle. Both Iko and Marika get a little worried when he doesn't say anything, completely entranced by Zeonli's presence. Kunon decides right there that he wants to look up to him as his master, so he quickly snaps out of it and finally introduces himself, asking Zeonli if he can call him Teacher Honey. Zeonli has no idea what he's talking about, so he refuses without a doubt and asks him to call him Master Zeonli. He makes it very clear that he hates brats, and he didn't accept the position of his magic teacher, so it's not like he wanted to be here. Kunon mentions that he must be here because of the ties of the rigid hierarchy in that case. Zeonli explains that the Grand Master told him there was an interesting brat he should meet, and that's why he's here. Dario decides to intervene, introducing himself as a knight from the Third Order, and mentioning that he's here to guard Mirika and Zeonli. Kunon thanks him for everything the other day, and Mirika is surprised that he knows him. Kunon clarifies that he doesn't personally know him, but he got scolded 3 times by him. Dario reminds him that he was just doing his job, and Zeonli just realizes what a strange kid Kunon is. Kunon asks Iko if Zeonli is the magnificently gorgeous sorcerer she mentioned, and she quickly confirms it, saying that he truly is perfect. Zeonli tells him that that's obvious, but Kunon clarifies that he can't see, so he doesn't understand what's cool, but he must be amazing for sure. For a moment, Zeonli thinks that he's kind of making fun of him, but Kunon assures him that's not the case at all, which only makes him think that he truly is a strange kid. Soon after that, they sit at a table in the garden, and Kunon thanks Mirika for bringing Zeonli here for him. Mirika dismisses it, saying that she wanted to see him too. Zeonli quickly stops them and reminds them that he's there as well, so they should stop flirting and have a fun discussion about magic with him. Kunon gladly accepts, but the smile on Zeonli's face makes Dario know that he wants to have fun picking on the kid. Zeonli starts by asking him if he knows compound spells, and Kunon tells him that spells are released from a magic circle drawn with magical power. Compound spells are created by dividing and rearranging magic circles, something he can easily do. Zeonli asks him how many sections he can handle now, and Kunon mentions that he can do 31, and he can go up to 32, but he fails sometimes. That takes Zeonli completely off guard, and he realizes that he's not too bad after all. He mentions that he can go up to 50 sections, and that alone is enough to greatly impress Kunon. Despite his surprise, Zeonli clarifies that he'd like to know how he got past the 20-section hurdle. Kunon explains that he layered crests, and he got there on his own by using a bunch of little tricks. Little tricks apparently gives a bad impression though, so he decides to call them alterations. Zeonli wasn't expecting something like that, and he soon realizes why Victo and Ratio were so mad at him because he got chosen as Kunon's teacher. They wanted to be his masters as well, and they didn't want him to be his teacher when he didn't even bother to meet him when he came to the Black Tower. Zeonli tried to tell them that it's not like he wanted to be his teacher, since the Grand Master simply told him that Kunon is interesting. Victo assured him that Kunon is not just interesting, and an excellent student like him won't come around too often. Ratio tried to tell him about all the things he did during his visit, but Zeonli truly didn't understand until now. Now he can see why they were so invested in getting him, because he is an exceptional talent indeed. Zeonli asks him to show him what he can do, but Kunon asks him to show him how to do 50 sections first. Zeonli tells him that it's pointless to teach it to someone who can't do it, and he's not going to waste his time, so he must prove what he can do and ask for instruction fair and square by sucking up to him. Marika remains silent because she's sure that Kunon would never do that. However, Kunon accepts without hesitation, telling Zeonli how cool he is and saying that he wants him to teach him because he'd love to see how awesome he is. Marika realizes that she spoke too soon, and Kunon continues showering Zeonli with praise, saying that sucking up to him isn't a problem if it means he can learn how to do 50 sections. Zeonli clearly wasn't expecting him to comply like that, and it kind of creeps him out. He clarifies that he has many things to say to him, but he starts by saying that he doesn't want him to call him master because he hasn't acknowledged him yet. Zeonli tells him that he will show him how awesome he is though, with his 3-star crest of Earth. Without wasting any time, he creates a great earth wall and asks Kunon to try to destroy it with magic. Otherwise, that's it for him. Zeonli also mentions that he heard his waterbed is popular, so he wants to see it for himself. Kunon decides to show him and uses Aori to create a squishy waterbed, and Zeonli tells him that he'll observe from there. As soon as he touches the waterbed, Zeonli immediately feels the softness of a pile of down feathers. And it's not just soft, it's warm and smells really nice. He falls asleep over it without even realizing, which clearly surprises Dario, but Iko explains that it's something that can't be helped. Kunon focuses on his task and touches the earth wall Zeonli created, which is really hard and yet smooth to the touch. It's very simple at first glance, but the density of magical power is incredible, and it's strong enough to sustain the hardness over time. Genie told him that magic is a crest, and a crest means a magic circle. The caster creates various spells by rearranging different magic circles, and those magic circles become the base of each spell. Compound magic refers to the number of times the base magic circle has been divided and reconstructed, and it's the essence of magic. This number shows the level of magic and alterations. When he observes the wall up close, Kunon realizes that it's a crystal of compound magic with over 40 sections. That's really impressive to him, because he doesn't know how someone can increase the sections this much. Before even trying anything, he decides to have a chat with Marika, wanting to wait until Zeonli wakes up. After a while, Zeonli abruptly wakes up and falls off the waterbed, and Dario lets him know that he was asleep for about 2 hours. When he sees Kunon calmly having some tea with Marika, Zeonli mentions that he looks awfully comfortable and assumes that he just gave up. Kunon denies it and asks him if he's ready for him to break the wall. Zeonli gladly asks him to try, and Kunon decides to use Rubu, the spell he used to help Iko with the laundry. A bunch of bubbles surround the wall, and Kunon explains that a dirt wall becomes extremely fragile when it absorbs water beyond its capacity. He could tell right away because the texture was very similar to that of the hard bread meant for breaking teeth. Zeonli admits that he got it more or less right except for the purpose of hard bread. He asks him why he used Rubu though, because he knows that his specialty is Aori. As the dirt wall completely crumbles apart, Kunon confidently explains that he just thought this would be easier. Zeonli then understands that rather than using force, he saw the wall as dirt and chose to wash it away. There are spells that are compatible with certain situations and subjects, and a sorcerer's job is to see through it. Kunon gladly takes that as a compliment and asks him if that means he can be his student now. Zeonli quickly tells him that he doesn't get to decide that, but just then, he informs him that, starting today, he is a student of Zeonli Finral. That means he's the luckiest kid in the world, because he is going to be his master. Kunon takes Mirika's hand and admits that he's right, because he found his master, and Princess Mirika is by his side. He's truly the luckiest, and if he wished for any more, he would surely get a divine punishment. Mirika is smitten by his words, but Zeonli asks them to cut it off once again, and reminds Kunon that his master comes before his fiancée. Now that he's his student, there's a ton of things for him to do, and he has a million things to teach him, so he'll help with his experiments. Mirika tries to protest, but Zeonli asks her what she will do, because Kunon is his student now, which means he'll improve a lot and move up in the world. Soon, women will swarm around him to fight over him, and she should understand what that means. Mirika surely understands, because Kunon has grown so much to become a student of a royal sorcerer, but she's still a princess of low status. If she doesn't do something, there is no future where Kunon and she can be together. Kunon can feel the slight trembling of her hands, so he immediately asks Zeonli not to be mean to Mirika. Zeonli clarifies that he's actually rooting for her, but Kunon calls him out and says that he actually likes being mean to girls, and he's probably the type to realize it too late. He's the type to be mean to a girl he likes and have her stolen from under his nose for sure, because he's the difficult, awkward type who can't be kind to girls. All of his comments clearly strike a nerve on Zeonli, who tries to contain his anger and asks him to stop. That night, however, Mirika is still thinking about Zeonli's words, and she knows that she has to do something about it and that she has to change somehow. The very next day, Zeonli is back at Kunon's house with Mirika and Dario, ready for their first lesson. Zeonli makes it very clear that he won't hold back on him, but Kunon is completely ready, welcoming any difficult training. He even tells him that he'll cry if he holds back on him, and excitedly asks him what they'll start with today. Kunon asks him if they'll start with a 3-dimensional magic circle or an oblique magic circle. His personal request is that they start with the 50 sections compound spell, since he really wants to learn to do that. Unfortunately, none of his guesses are correct, and Zeonli simply asks him to help him with paperwork. He mentions that he was looking for someone who can make clean copies of his memos, so his help is very appreciated. Kunon wasn't expecting a task like that, since it seems like a lot of paperwork, but Zeonli clarifies that there will be more. Kunon asks him if he doesn't love him anymore, and Zeonli easily tells him that he never has. Both Mirika and Dario are clearly worried about Kunon, but Iko still thinks that Zeonli is very merciless and cool, which she likes. Zeonli clarifies that these are state secrets, so they must stay outside until he's done. Kunon apologizes to Mirika, but she reassures him and tells him that she's rooting for him. As soon as they're gone, Zeonli asks him to make him that thing again, and Kunon uses Aori to create a squishy waterbed. In a matter of seconds, Zeonli is already deeply asleep over the thing, and Kunon is left with his paperwork. Meanwhile, Iko asks Mirika if she'd like some tea as they wait for Kunon to finish with his task. However, Mirika has something different in mind and tells her that she has a favor to ask of her. Soon enough, Iko helps Mirika put her hair up in a ponytail so she can practice sword training outside. Mirika explains that she's only just begun and has much to improve, so she wants to practice whenever she has spare time. She quickly asks Iko not to tell Kunon about it though, and Iko easily agrees, accepting to keep the secret. Once everything's ready, Mirika heads outside and starts with her sword training, fighting Dario in a duel with wooden swords. Dario easily blocks her attacks and then apologizes before disarming her, taking her by surprise. Without hesitation, Mirika picks her sword back up and continues trying despite how exhausted she is. After all, she wants to become someone suitable for Kunon, and she's not giving up anytime soon. Kunon continues with the paperwork, creating clean copies of Zeonli's messy memos. Zeonli finally wakes up after a while and asks him if he's done already, but Kunon lets him know that he's only about halfway. Zeonli quickly complains about how slow he is, but Kunon tells him that he's exhausted from trying to decipher his scrawls. His letter looks just like an earthworm writing by the wayside because it carelessly came out of the comfort of damp ground. Zeonli asks him not to compare his wisdom with a hopeless situation and reminds him that this is significant training, so he shouldn't complain at all. Kunon thinks twice about it and decides to check the memos again, while Zeonli explains that information and knowledge are different. What he can gain from reading is just information, and what he analyzes in his head and writes with his own hand, his body remembers. It becomes knowledge that is wildly different from information, and knowledge becomes power. Kunon is thrilled by the information, feeling proud that Zeonli is his master again. By the end of the day, Zeonli already has to leave, but he asks Kunon to make sure to finish everything by next time. Before he leaves, Kunon mentions that there was a memo of a diagram, and he wants to know if it was some kind of spell. Zeonli tells him that it'll be quicker to show him and asks him to go to him next time. Kunon easily agrees, and then takes Mirika's hand, saying that he's happy that he gets to see her often, thanks to Zeonli visiting him here. Mirika smiles and tells him it's the same for her, but Zeonli asks him not to confuse the means with the end. Sometime later, Kunon decides to go back to the Black Tower, and Reisha asks him if he has grown taller. Kunon confirms it, saying that he's 10 years old now, and one of the other sorcerers tells him that his magical power has become a bit stronger too. Victo asks him if he wants to do another magic battle with him, but Reisha quickly protests, saying that Kunon promised that he would do a flying magic experiment with her. Victo tells her that it's his turn already, but Zeonli suddenly shows up to stop them, asking them to get out of his way because Kunon is here to see him. The royal sorcerers complain, saying that he's monopolizing him again, which is not fair. Zeonli ignores them and asks Kunon to follow him, but both Reisha and Victo try to warn Kunon that he shouldn't go with him to that room, because that place is the world of demons. Before they can stop him, Zeonli asks Kunon to do that thing again, and soon enough, all the royal sorcerers are deeply asleep over squishy waterbeds. As they walk into the Black Tower, Zeonli asks him if he knows what magic tools are. Kunon mentions that they're tools that work with a sorcerer's magical power, and Zeonli confirms it. He points at a lamp on the wall as an example, and tells him that it's a magic tool of fire. He explains that magical engineers are sorcerers who make their living by creating magic tools. After walking for a while, they finally reach the room all the sorcerers fear, which is full of papers. However, Kunon is simply amazed, and he excitedly asks him if all of these are his scrawls. Zeonli stubbornly reminds him that they're memos, not scrawls. Kunon wastes no time and decides to check some of the memos, saying that there's a spell he's never tried out before. He also finds a grimoire he wanted so much that he tried to rely on his father's collusion with the king. Without hesitation, he tells Zeonli that he wants to live here now, and Zeonli lets him know that he doesn't need to use collusion or live here because eventually he can have it all. That aside, he shows him the magic tool he's developing right now and mentions that it's what was in the diagram. Zeonli explains that when it's completed, he can eat a piping hot meal in his own room without going to the kitchen. Kunon is thrilled at the idea that he can bake an apple pie in his room, so he really likes this tool already. Zeonli tells him that his earth magic is good for modeling shapes, but the fine details and soft parts are not so easy. Kunon asks him if he thinks his water magic can make the soft parts in that case. Zeonli tells him that he really picks up quickly and explains that eventually he'll help with his work, which will double as experiments. That idea sounds fun for the two of them, but before they can continue the conversation, the Grandmaster decides to pay them a visit. He's really happy to see Kunon, since he's been waiting for him, and wants to discuss the essence of magic over lunch, as they promised. Zeonli doesn't like the idea at all, so he asks Kunon to make that thing again. Once the Grandmaster is deeply asleep on a squishy waterbed, Zeonli continues with their conversation. He explains that his earth magic can take care of reinforcing the outer frame, but water magic might be better for the small internal mechanism. Kunon agrees, and after discussing it for a bit, they decide to go have lunch, and of course the Grandmaster follows, saying that the bed he made is really nice. Victo takes the opportunity to tell Kunon that he must not hesitate to speak up if he wants to change his teacher. Kunon confidently tells him that he's being worked to the bone, but Zeonli is a wonderful master. Zeonli can immediately feel everyone glaring at him, and they're clearly not happy. Kunon also mentions that water and earth are quite compatible, so he couldn't have asked anyone better, and he's grateful to the Grandmaster. Zeonli asks him to cut it off already, but Kunon simply asks him if he's embarrassed because his beloved student admires him. He clearly doesn't notice the hostility in the room, so Zeonli just asks him to stop it for his personal safety. Kunon finally decides to change the subject and asks for Mirika, saying that he'd love to have some tea with her since he's here. Reisha informs him that Mirika is at the entrance ceremony of the senior school for nobles today, and was very disappointed that she couldn't see him. The Grandmaster asks Kunon what he plans to do now that Mirika's higher education has started. Kunon tells him that if it's necessary, he'll take the graduation exam, but the Grandmaster clarifies that he meant the magic school. He explains that it's a school where bright sorcerers from all over the world attend and learn, and all the royal sorcerers here are graduates of that school. Zeonli tells Kunon that he has to be 12 or older to enroll, so he still has time, but he should give it some thought. Kunon does give it some thought, and 2 years later, he continues with Zeonli's magic lessons. In one of their practices, Zeonli casts sharp spears with his earth magic to attack him, but Kunon uses a compound spell of 55 sections to create a water barrier. He creates a big wave that completely swallows all the earth spears, and Zeonli asks him to stop, saying that he finally did it. Everyone then heads inside to have some freshly baked pie, which Iko baked in the magic tool they developed together. Kunon mentions that this magic tool is quite popular, so he's sure quite a bit of money is going into Zeonli's pocket, only his pocket. Zeonli pretends not to hear him, but Kunon directly asks him if he'll get paid for his work after all. Zeonli reminds him that he allowed him to do experiments money can't buy, so he should be content with that. Iko tries to reassure him and tells him that she'll support his livelihood because she knows his talent better than anyone. After their little break, they head to Kunon's office, and Mirika mentions that he has collaborated on 7 magic tools already. Kunon tells her that he has also collaborated on 5 papers on new theories on magic. They also made a manual for magic experiments, and they're currently working on another magic tool. Zeonli tells him that he can do the rest by himself, but Kunon reminds him that they're co-developing the chest that draws in a bunch of bugs. Zeonli clarifies that that sounds unprofessional and asks him to simply call it the insects box. Kunon then asks him how they're completing the bunch of insects box, which still sounds unprofessional. Zeonli reminds him that he's turning 12 this spring, so he should get ready to go to the magic school. Kunon hesitates for a moment and then tells him that he doesn't want to go, and he doesn't think he needs to, because he has him as his master. He wants to learn magic by his side and get work to the bone like these last 2 years. Zeonli tells him that he's finished making the clean copies of his memos and blueprints of magic tools already. He also reminds him that he's an earth sorcerer, so he can't teach him water magic. Kunon still tries to insist, but Zeonli asks him what if there's an extraordinary water sorcerer at the magic school. After all, the world is much bigger than Huglia, and he doesn't know who he can find there. Kunon immediately takes interest in that, and Zeonli mentions that he can find a 3-star, or maybe even a 4-star if he's lucky. That makes him hesitate, but he's still not entirely sure, so Mirika takes his hand and asks him to go, to become an amazing sorcerer. She promises that she'll become a fine woman who is worthy of him and wait for him. That alone is enough to convince Kunon, who decides that he'll go to the magic school. However, when Zeonli tells him where the school is, Kunon immediately changes his mind, saying that it's way too far. Zeonli exasperatedly tells him that he has to go, leaving him no choice. Before they leave, Kunon asks him what he needs to do exactly to prepare for the magic school, wondering if he should take a change of clothes and the pillow he uses every day. Zeonli tells him that he has something much more important, and that thing is his eyes. Kunon is taken by surprise, and as soon as they leave, he immediately runs back into the house. Once he's at his study, he quickly starts writing something down, wondering how he could forget his biggest ambition, his fervent wish, and the most important purpose that he lives for. It's because he has learned to do so many things without seeing, and somewhere in his heart, he felt he could just go on like this, but now he feels like such a fool for thinking that way. Meanwhile, Mirika cries in the carriage on her way home, saying that she can't do this. Z only tells her that she played it cool in front of her boyfriend, so she should stop crying already. Dario kicks him without hesitation before he can say anything else, trying to make him leave her alone. Mirika finally stops crying, but she's still thinking about Kunon, because in the last 2 years, he has built his track record as a sorcerer. If he gains sight through his magic, he'll go down in history as the first person to have achieved such a feat. If he goes far away, she might get left behind, and that's a thought she can't possibly bear. Mirika tells Dario that part of her can't help but wish that Kunon's eyes will never see, so that he'll stay by her side. That's why she feels like a despicable woman, and Zeonli almost tells her that she is, but Dario kicks him again, saying that he can voluntarily shut up, or he can shut him up instead. Once Zeonli is silenced, Dario kindly tells Mirika that there's light and darkness in their hearts, but she must avoid getting swallowed by either and choose the right path. That easily makes her feel better, and Dario reminds her that what she's been training for the last 2 years isn't just her body. Zeonli asks him if he isn't too lenient on his student, but Dario clarifies that he is too strict with his own student because he drove him into the ground and then abandoned him in the end. Zeonli reminds him that he taught him the compound spell of 55 sections, the 3-dimensional magic circle, the anchored cylindrical magic circle, imaginary codes, realogic sand patterns, and magic tools. That's why he firmly believes that he's the best master there is. Dario asks him if Kunon's eyes will be complete if he uses those, but Zeonli clarifies that he has no idea. Mirika asks him if he just fed him a bunch of nonsense, and Zeonli asks her to watch it, saying that her darkness is showing right now. He tells her that even he has never heard of how to make eyeballs, so from here on, it's all up to Kunon, but he has no doubt that he'll do it, because he's his beloved student he's proud of. A few days later, after writing things non-stop, Kunon uses Aori, thinking about a mirror that reflects everything. Zeonli once said that the eye of an insect is a cluster of over 10,000 mirrors, but even if they reflect a lot, nothing transmits to him. Kunon then decides to use Arubu, covering the mirror he made with bubbles entirely. Unfortunately, that doesn't work either, which makes him feel a little disappointed. He then uses Aori to create multiple water balls around him, making them spin slowly. Kunon is still as lost as before though, and he ends up collapsing at night, with a bunch of memos scattered on the floor. He feels completely hopeless, and decides to visit his brother, Ixio, to ask him to join him in the sauna. Ixio excitedly accepts the invitation, but he also invites his father, since it'd be worse not to wake him up for this, because he absolutely loves the sauna he creates. Just as expected, their father excitedly accepts the invitation, and decides to invite his wife as well, because it'd be worse not to wake her up. Kunon creates the perfect sauna for his family, and they all enjoy a nice drink while they're there. He thinks this is the best way to refresh now that he's stuck, since it's the biggest experiment he's done so far. His family already know that he's talking about his eyeballs, and Kunon confesses that he's nowhere near close. Ixio tells him that he can go to him if he needs a breather again anytime, and his father agrees, saying that he's at his disposal. Kunon thanks them, and he can't help but feel grateful because his family is too nice, and he can't wait to see their faces already. Time goes by as usual, and he spends time with Mirika and the royal sorcerers as well, always wondering what they will look like once he can finally see. One day, he casts Aori and Arubu, trying to do the same thing as last time, knowing that the core of the spell is the water mirror. He applied a realogic sand pattern on the surface, so that the pattern could read the moving view and send it to his mind. Once that's done, he casts Aori again, covering the core with a water-different ball. There's no complex configuration or relaying mechanism, and all he had to do was to think simple, without worrying about numbers and range. When he opens his eyes, Kunon can finally see for the first time in his life, and he learns what it means to see. He soon starts crying, realizing that he finally did it, and he can actually see everything. Kunon tries to look out the window, but that's when he suddenly notices a giant crab right behind him, which leaves him clearly confused. Since it's not really doing anything, Kunon decides to ignore it for a moment and uses Aori to create a full-body mirror. He mentally prepares before opening his eyes, because he already decided that the first person he'd look at if he ever gained sight would be himself, the person he hates the most. He grew up unable to do anything alone, and everything was a struggle all the time, always troubling people around him because he'd fall all the time and hurt himself. That's why the person he hates the most in the world is himself. Kunon finally opens his eyes and sees himself for the first time, taking a close look at his face and realizing that he's not truly dashing, and he has no beard either, which was to be expected, since he's still a child. He had wondered if looking at his face would make him hate himself even more, or if perhaps it'd make him happy, but he is still himself after all. Kunon sighs, saying that it is rather anticlimactic, and he asks the giant crab if it thinks he can come to like himself. Leaving that aside, he wonders what this creature truly is, and he starts thinking that it might be Iko. As soon as he mentions her name, Iko breaks into the room, asking him if he needs anything. Kunon jumps startled, and just then he realizes that he can't actually touch the giant crab. His hand goes through it like a ghost, letting him know that the creature is immaterial. Iko asks him what's wrong, and only then Kunon turns around to see her for the first time. He observes her for a moment, and Iko doesn't know what's going on until she realizes that he's actually looking at her. Kunon asks her if her hair is in a braid, trying to find out if what he sees is actually true. Iko excitedly confirms this, and Kunon mentions that he didn't didn't know maid outfits symbolized cleanliness so well. She reminds him that a gentleman would first tell her that it looks good on her and that she looks cute. Iko can't hold back her tears of joy anymore because he really made it happen and he can finally see now. She hugs him without hesitation, saying that she's really happy for him. Kunon gets a little dizzy, so she quickly pulls away and says that they should let his father know right away and she must cook up a feast for tonight. Kunon hesitates and glances at the giant crab behind him for a moment, and he then asks Iko if she's in the mood for some creamy crab croquettes. Iko tells him that she can do that if he wants, and just then Kunon decides to ask her if she has a horn on her head. Iko gets a little confused and denies it, though she mentions that she sometimes gets one when she's mad, but now that she's happy, it's pulled in. Kunon can definitely see a horn on Iko's head, but it apparently isn't there for anyone else, so he's glad he didn't mention it at all when he saw her. He decides to go outside and look at the scenery for the first time, but what looks like a beautiful flower field in a sunny day looks completely different in his vision. Kunon can only see a desolate area with a pitch-black void as the sun, covering everything in darkness. He takes a moment to observe the surroundings, but everything is gloomy and dark, which is clearly not what he expected. Iko approaches him to cover him with a blanket, saying that it's chilly outside. She then asks him to go meet his family already, because she's sure that everyone will be over the moon. Kunon agrees and laughs nervously, asking her if she sees something behind him at all, since that giant crab has followed him outside. Iko excitedly asks him if he's about to tell her a scary story because she really loves those. Kunon pauses for a moment and decides to forget it, since she clearly can't see anything. As they both walk outside, Kunon thinks to himself, knowing that the experiment was a massive success, and he now can see. He tries to convince himself that it's good news, but he can't ignore the giant black void in the sky right now, and the terrifying scenery. Once he gets home, Kunon sees his brother and his mother first, who are truly happy to know that he can see now. Tinaliza doesn't hesitate to hug him, saying that she's really glad and proud of him for this. Even thought they're both very excited, Kunon doesn't know what to say because he can definitely see black wings on Ixio's back, and his mother has different colored eyes. They look super cool for some reason, so he decides to say that to his mother, letting her know that she looks really cool. Ixio corrects him, saying that he probably wanted to say that their mother looks beautiful. Kunon nervously agrees, saying that she looks beautiful, like a heroine from an epic adventure perhaps. Tinaliza smiles, assuming that he means that she's like the princess, but Kunon actually meant the heroine holding the sword. He decides not to mention that and tells his brother that he also looks cool, though he asks him if his parents happen to be fallen angels by any chance. This takes Ixio off guard for a moment, making him kind of confused, so he reminds him that they have the same parents, so he knows the answer already. Kunon admits that he's right, but before saying anything else, he asks Iko in a whisper if there are humans with wings in this world. Iko confidently tells him that every single one of them is born with wings, and by spreading the wings called freedom and potential, they can soar into the sky of the mind. She continues talking about it, but Kunon simply tries to understand everything he's seen so far. He saw the crab, the horn, the eyes of a heroine from an adventure, and the wings of a fallen angel. All of these things are immaterial, and only he can see them, but he doesn't know why. His father soon rushes to meet him, and since both Kunon's mother and brother are the badass type, he assumes that his father will be the same. However, when he opens the door, Kunon only sees a distorted figure that doesn't look human. It looks like a dark silhouette surrounded by something bright, but Kunon doesn't even understand what he is. Kunon does his best to keep a neutral expression, despite how weird everything is, since his family is apparently very happy for him. Arson says that they will celebrate this tonight, and they must send word to the castle as well. Tinaliza suggests they decorate with a lot of beautiful flowers Kunon can enjoy looking at, and Iko says that she's going to cook tons of creamy crab croquettes. Once they leave to prepare everything, Kunon reluctantly asks his brother if their father is usually like fog within a family, since that's what he looks like to him. Ixio immediately asks him not to ever say that out loud, because he'll make their father cry for real. Kunon accepts this with resignation, knowing that he won't get answers on his own, so he'll have to ask his master for advice later. Meanwhile, at the Black Tower, Victo visits Xianli's room, and mentions that this is his first time actually seeing the floor in his room, since it was always covered in paperwork and messy memos. Xianli throws a pen at him and asks him to state his business, so Victo tells him that it's a message from the Grand Master. The king has granted him permission to go outside, so he can finally go, because there's good news apparently. Xianli is a little surprised by that, but he already knows that this is about Kunon. Soon enough, Marika, Xianli, and Dario go to Kunon's house in a carriage after hearing the news. Kunon greets Marika with his eyes closed, as always, and she's really happy that he finally made his dream come true. Kunon smiles and shows her the eye he made with magic, saying that it's the eye of mirrors that reflects everything, and he called it the glass eye. Marika excitedly asks him if he'll take a look at her face, but Kunon hesitates for a bit, not knowing what kind of weird thing the glass eye will show him. He nervously smiles and tries to play it cool, saying that it'd be his pleasure because he's worked hard so he can see her face, and he's really excited. After much beating around the bush, Kunon finally opens his eyes and sees Marika for the first time, noticing that her hair is gorgeous blonde like the rays of the morning sun, and she has ice blue eyes. She's just as beautiful as he imagined, if not more, but of course, she had to have something weird in this distorted vision, which is a single white feather poking out of her head. Marika is taken by surprise by his reaction, so she asks him if she's not his type. Kunon quickly quickly clarifies that that's not the case at all, and he nervously assures her that that will never be true when it comes to her. He tells her that she's more than he imagined, and she's just like a feather of a beautiful bird. Mirika is happy to know that he likes her, though she's a little confused by that last comment. Iko confidently says that Kunon means the wings of freedom and potential, and explains that if the young and fresh Princess Mirika is flying freely in the sky, a large middle-aged man with a beard will come catch her in a silver cage. Mirika simply smiles awkwardly, saying that her analogy is scary, as always. Dario approaches them to clarify that right now, Mirika has the skill to take down a large, middle-aged man with a beard in one hit. That aside, Kunon takes a moment to look at him, and he reluctantly mentions that he has a very cool sword. Dario brags about his sword, saying that it's his partner, but the sword Kunon is seeing is definitely different, one that no one else can see. Zeonli finally comes out of the carriage to meet him, but Kunon can't even recognize him because all he sees is a bright, glowing figure with a staff. He covers his eyes and asks him if he's his master, saying that he can't see him well because he's too bright. Zeonli confidently tells him that he's obviously bright, and he's always shining in fact. Kunon clarifies that that's not quite what he means, and he tries to look at him again, but gets immediately blinded in a second by how bright he is. He can't take it anymore, so he tells Zeonli that there is something he'd like to discuss alone. Mirika decides to go with Dario and train with swords in the meantime, and Kunon decides to tell Zeonli everything. Zeonli can't help but laugh loudly at Kunon's explanation, because it doesn't make sense that he has a giant crab with him, and Dario has a ginormous blade. Kunon says that this is no laughing matter, and mentions that from now on, when he asks for Mirika's hand in marriage, or move into a new residence, he'll be carrying a crab, and the princess will have a quill sticking out of her head. Zeonli finally stops laughing and analyzes the situation, thinking about the fact that the colors of the scenery he sees also seem different, and he's apparently shining to him. He smugly smiles and clarifies that he's always shining, and among humans, he's the brightest in the world. Kunon can't even properly look at him though, because he's as bright as the sun itself, and that hurts his eyes. Zeonli tells him that he has two guesses, primarily speaking, and one is the possibility where he's seeing the shapes of souls. Kunon assumes that he means it's something spiritual, but mentions that in that case, his soul is a crab. Zeonli tells him that the other guess is the pattern where magic sickness is causing visual hallucination. He explains that some locations can accumulate magical power, while other places can be pathways of magical power. He's been to one of those spots, and it rendered him useless, like he got drunk after too many drinks. In the fading consciousness, he saw things that were immaterial until he collapsed. That sounds similar to what Kunon is experiencing, but Zeonli tells him that they can't determine which this is since there's not enough data. If he sees more, they might find a pattern, and that will help them figure out what this is. Kunon looks at him, covering the glass eye with his hand so he doesn't get blinded by Zeonli's brightness. He asks him if this experiment could have been a failure, but Zeonli tells him that that's not possible because it's the masterpiece of his beloved student. To reassure him, he explains that there are many creatures in nature that don't see colors, creatures with many eyes, and creatures that can't see, like him. No one knows what's the right way to see, so he can have his own way of seeing things, and maybe what he sees might be telling him something very important. If it's really tough for him, he can seal it, but if not, then he should keep on seeing, even if it's not what he expected. Kunon feels better thanks to his words, and he agrees, saying that he has only started to see, after all. Zeonli asks him not to tell anyone that he's seeing things for now, until he figures out the pattern and the conclusion, because there may be people who find it strange. Kunon accepts, feeling more at ease after asking Zeonli for advice, though he's still blinding and can't possibly look at him. Meanwhile, Mirika waits outside with Iko, and mentions that Kunon's birthday is coming up soon, so she'd like to know what gift would make him happy. Iko tells her that she's sure he'll be happy with anything from her, and that makes Mirika happy. Kunon finally comes out of the house to greet them, but this time, Zeonli can't hold his laugh when he imagines Mirika with a quill sticking out of her head. Mirika doesn't know what's going on, so Kunon quickly dismisses it, saying that it's just a private conversation. He changes the subject right away and asks them what they were talking about, but Iko responds in the same way and tells him that it was a private conversation. Sometime later, Iko helps Kunon clear his study, taking all the books he already read to the library of the main building. Once they're done organizing everything, she mentions that she never knew this room was so spacious, since it was always full of books. Time goes by, and it's finally Kunon's 12th birthday, so his family makes a celebration for that. His father gives him a new cane as a gift, saying that it might be a bit heavy, but it's sturdy and will last long. His mother gives him a quill, hoping that he studies a lot with it, and Ixio gives him a map of foodies, saying that he looked up good restaurants on the way to the magic school. The school is pretty far away, so he thought it'd be good to have something to look forward to on his trip. The mood at the table instantly dies as soon as they remember how far the school is, and Tinalisa soon starts crying, knowing that her son is moving far away. Ixio nervously tries to reassure her, saying that Kunon will surely graduate in no time. Arson agrees with him and reassures his wife, reminding everyone that they're celebrating today, so they should enjoy themselves. Kunon decides to have some time alone with Mirika at the balcony, and she asks him if he's finished preparing for his trip. He affirms it, saying that he's taking comfortable clothes and bare necessities because he'll buy anything else he needs there. Mirika mentions that she has school on the day he departs, so she's sorry she won't won't be able to see him off. Kunon asks her not to worry about that because she has something she must do. Mirika finally decides to give him her birthday present, which is a matching pair of bracelets for them. Kunon happily thanks her for the gift, saying that matching with her outshines any royal crown. Even his master will have wisdom tooth pain from the stress if he showers him with this radiance. Mirika tells him that if things get tough at the magic school, he can speak to it like it's her, and she will do the same. Kunon smiles and tells her that he'll write to her, and he will come back to her, no matter what. Mirika tells him that she will write to him as well, and she'll be waiting for his return. The two of them say goodbye that night, and the day Kunon finally leaves arrives. Everyone heads outside to see him off, and Tinaliza can't help but cry again, so her husband tells her that they must see him off without tears, because he's sure Kunon is feeling more anxious than anyone. She tries to smile, saying that he's right, but it's clearly difficult for everyone to keep a smile on their faces. Even though they're all so affected by this, Kunon simply gets in the carriage and nonchalantly says goodbye. This takes them a little off guard, and Iko gets in the carriage the same way, not even looking at them. Kunon uses Aori to surround the wheels with a thin layer of water as always, and once the carriage starts moving, he says goodbye once again, saying that he'll see them in 2, 3, 4, or 5 years. He's not nervous at all, and he's just excited, wondering what kinds of sorcerers he'll meet at the magic school. 5 days after they leave the manor, Iko starts wondering how long it will take to get to Durashik, where the magic school is. Kunon tells her that they're still in the kingdom of Huglia, so at this rate, maybe it'll take a month. It's really far away, but at least they should be at his grandfather's manor soon. After a moment of silence, Kunon decides to ask her if she's sure this is it, and Iko confirms it with a solemn expression, saying that this is where they say goodbye. She explains that she'd like to get married because she's already past marriageable age, so it has to be now or never. After all, if she gives up now, she'll give up on the idea for the rest of her life. Kunon asks her if she thinks he can live without her, but Iko simply jokes and asks him if he'll leave Mirika and marry her in that case. Before he can say anything, Iko informs him that she can see his grandfather's manor already. Once they get there, Kunon mentions that it's been 4 years since he came to visit the main family, and he doesn't even remember why he came here 4 years ago. Iko reminds him that he heard that there was a huge library here back then, so he thought there might be books on magic and dragged his whole family here. Kunon doesn't remember such a thing, but his parents very well remember that he was desperate and he wouldn't stop dancing until they said that they'd take him there. Iko remembers those times with a fond expression, saying that back then he did everything he could to learn magic. The moment is interrupted when Kunon's grandfather suddenly runs out of the manor to greet him with a warm hug, clearly very happy to see him. Kunon uses his glass eyes to see his grandfather for the first time and notices 2 horns on his head like a demon lord. His grandfather asks him if Tinaliza is doing well, but Kunon is still thinking about the fact that his mother looks like a hero, so he tells him that she's doing so well she could totally defeat him. That comment doesn't faze the old man at all, who's just happy that his daughter is doing well. He mentions that to celebrate his enrollment at the magic school, he'll buy him anything he wants. Iko quickly intervenes and gives him a letter for him from Tinaliza, but the old man is still encouraging Kunon to ask him for gems, jewels, or whatever he desires. Iko tries to make him snap out of it and reminds him that it's a letter from his daughter. Kunon's grandfather finally listens to her and decides to read the letter, though he's not happy to find out that Tinaliza doesn't want him to spend over 500,000 NECA on Kunon. He's very quick to complain, saying that it's not a child's allowance, but Kunon reminds him that a 12-year-old is still a child, and Iko says that that's 2 months of her salary. The old man says that it should be fine if she doesn't find out, and he even suggests buying him a large vessel secretly. Kunon declines the offer and asks him to send for his new maid, because he's here so she can take over from Iko. His grandfather finally gives up on the issue and calls in the new maid, who introduces herself as Rinko Round, saying that she's 18, and she applied for this job because the pay wasn't too bad. She mentions that she wants to open her own store in the future and also save up for wedding expenses, so she agreed to this position. Kunon uses his glass eye to see her, and he instantly knows that she's Iko's sister, only because she has a unicorn horn on her forehead, just like Iko. He doesn't mention that, of course, and Rinko tells him that her sister recommended this job to her, and she already has a fiancé, unlike her. Iko calmly asks her if she wants to get beat up, so Rinko quickly clarifies that she's just saying that she's not open to being contracted as a mistress. Kunon tells her that she doesn't have to worry about that, because he has a fiancé as well, so she should cherish her fiancé more than the 3 mealtimes of the day. Without hesitation, Rinko says that she will, because they promised that they'd open the store together, and she needs money for that too. Kunon is clearly pleased by her response, saying that he was worried she might not get his sense of humor. Iko informs him that people have called them lively sisters since they were small, so they've always been that way. The 2 sisters soon head to the kitchen to prepare a meal, and Rinko confesses that she was nervous since she told her that Kunon was the scion of a marquis and a sorcerer with a hero's scar, but he seems easygoing. Iko tells her that when Kunon is focused on magic, he often forgets to eat, so she has to make him sandwiches so he can eat while he studies. Rinko remembers that Iko mentioned that his favorite sandwiches are hamburg steak and bacon. Her sister also adds that he likes milk and tea as well, and she always has to ask him if he wants it without milk or without tea. Rinko laughs at that and says that she just knows that she'll get along just fine. Iko tells her that she's sure that she will, and then remembers the moment Arson assigned her to attend Kunon. He told her that her reputation preceded her, and that Kunon could use someone as cheerful and lively as her. Iko then met Kunon for the first time, and over time she witnessed how Kunon went from being a reserved child to one almost as lively as her. After remembering all those moments, Iko tells her sister that Kunon is still a child, one that is earnest and listens to people around him. That's why she wants to warn her that if she puts any weird ideas in his head, she'll have her to answer to. With a serious expression, Iko warns her that she'll beat her up if she teaches him anything naughty. Rinko doesn't know what she means by that, and asks her if she's talking about stuff like chasing skirts. Iko immediately covers her ears and asks her to stop, saying that she doesn't want to hear it because Kunon is the sweetest angel, and she can't stand the thought of some random wench coming in contact with him. Iko continues rambling, saying that Princess Mirika is the only one who is allowed to touch him as a woman. Rinko easily gets the idea and tries to make her sister calm down, assuring her that she'll watch out for his relationships with women. However, she also reminds her that Kunon is a gentleman, so he's naturally kind to women. He almost always speaks to them and gives them compliments, so he's just an easy target for women. Iko asks her why she describes him so terribly, and Rinko explains that it's simply what she told her, and it only follows that he'll become a womanizer. Iko immediately cuts her off, saying that Kunon would never do that because he's an angel. Rinko tries to insist, but Iko is completely in denial, and she doesn't want to hear any of it. After their discussion in the kitchen, Kunon enjoys his sandwich, saying that it's really tasty, especially the bacon, smoked by the warmth and love of two sisters. Rinko simply proves her point further with the way he speaks to them, but Iko is still in denial. The next morning, it's finally time for Kunon's departure, so Iko decides to visit him in his room to see if he's ready. Kunon asks her if she remembers what he said after Jinier and Flora quit, that he'd never be fine if she left him too. Iko's smile is nowhere to be seen as she remembers that, and Kunon mentions that right now, he's away from his father, his mother, his big brother, the royal sorcerers, his master, and Princess Mirika, and now he'll be away from her and go to the magic school. But this is what he wanted and decided for himself. Kunon asks her for reassurance, saying that she'll be away from him, but they're only apart and she won't be gone. Iko agrees and assures him that he can see her when he comes home, because she will continue this work in Huglia after she gets married. Kunon mentions that it will be a few years until he sees her next, and Iko tells him that she may have a child by then, an adorable child like him. Iko finally decides to say goodbye and asks him to take care, while Kunon thanks her for everything and says goodbye with a hug. He gets in the carriage after that, and his grandfather tries to tell him that he doesn't have to go, and he can even live with him. Kunon simply says goodbye and asks to start the carriage, easily leaving his grandfather behind. Rinko asks him if he's sure it was fine to leave, since the Lord Regent was still saying something to him. Kunon explains that it will only take longer if he responds, so it's fine to leave just like that. That aside, he thanks her for coming to work for him, and Rinko smiles and tells him that it's her pleasure. He then asks her if she's sure she's okay, because her fiancé will have to wait for several years. Rinko assures him it's okay, since her fiancé said that he'd wait because it was to make money for their store. Kunon asks her what store it is going to be, wanting to know if it'll be a shady business of sweeping people under the rug. Rinko admits that she did think about that, but she decided on a restaurant instead because she likes eating, and they're kind of the same thing, but this is legal. Kunon agrees, saying that the only difference is sustaining people with food or getting rid of them in the dark. They both laugh about it, and it's clear that they already get along pretty well in their own way. After a while, they get to a city that is close to Dirashik, which is why they find a lot of magic stores. Rinko can only assume that Dirashik is a nation of amazing magic because of that. As they walk through the city, Kunon suddenly stops when he spots a book in front of a store. He decides to go in right away and finds out that there's a shelf full of books on magic. Rinko reminds him that his grandfather's library was way bigger, but Kunon tells her that it didn't have a lot of books on magic, and he's only read a handful so far. She then asks him if he'd like to buy some now in that case, but Kunon clarifies that they'll end up on the streets if they do that. Rinko doesn't understand what he means by that until she sees that only one book is 5 million NECA. She immediately freaks out with the price, saying that the book alone can cover a store for her and her fiancé, plus a branch store. Kunon explains that magic books are one of a kind, and that's why each book costs a fortune. Rinko exclaims that it's too expensive, and Kunon tries to warn her that she shouldn't be so loud in a store. Just then, the shopkeeper asks him if he's a sorcerer, wanting to know if he's a student at the magic school by any chance. Kunon tells her that he's an applicant, and his attribute of magic is water. The woman excitedly asks him to show her, so Kunon decides to use Aori to create a cute little white cat with blue eyes. She's immediately charmed by the tiny creature, and Kunon asks her if she's a sorcerer as well. The woman tells him that she's not a sorcerer, but she just loves magic, and she really wanted to work in the field of magic. She's only a magic enthusiast, and he's made her day, because she didn't think that she'd meet a sorcerer who can use such an adorable spell. She mentions that Dirashik is intense these days, so she wishes him the best of luck. After all, this year, the Saint of the Holy Kingdom is enrolling as well. Last year, they had the Inferno Prince and Lightning Bolt of the New Kingdom, and now he's joining them, so he'll surely be famous. Kunon is clearly looking forward to it, and the shopkeeper takes the chance to offer him a second-hand grimoire of the most popular sorcerer, Xionli Finroll. She tells him that she'll give him a special discount, but Kunon simply declines the offer and exits the store, leaving her pretty confused. Rinko is still thinking about the prices of the books, but she mentions that the grimoire was a really great bargain, and asks him if he's sure he doesn't want it. Kunon clarifies that he knows the contents already, and it's most likely the clean copy he made. That information clearly throws her off, but Kunon doesn't say anything else about it, and decides to check out a tailoring shop next. He takes his time touching some furs, trying to learn their textures, but the shopkeeper is obviously confused. After all, this well-dressed child with a maid came into his store, and now he's just touching the merchandise. Kunon isn't listening to him, and Rinko is simply having fun trying on different types of hats. The man finally loses his patience and asks him what he's doing touching his merchandise. Kunon asks him to pay him no mind, and explains that he was trying to memorize the texture, because simple words like cloth and fur can cover diverse textures. The shopkeeper is a little intrigued by this, so he informs him that the fur he's holding is dark fox fur, and it is very rare, so he should touch it. Without letting him finish, Kunon uses Aori to create a realistic dark fox, taking him by surprise. The man is clearly surprised by how real it feels, and asks him if he can reproduce anything if he knows the texture. Kunon confirms it, saying that he can only reproduce shape and texture for now. The man reluctantly asks him if he can reproduce a woman in that case, but Rinko immediately jumps at him and asks him what he's suggesting to a child. The shopkeeper instantly panics and apologizes, but Rinko tells him that an apology isn't going to cut it because he's tainting Kunon's precious ears. Kunon calmly says that reproducing a human is too complicated, so he can't do it, and he gets yelled at a lot if he does. Rinko quickly gets him out of the store, saying that this store is just for trashy adults. The shopkeeper desperately apologizes again and explains that he only asked on impulse because he has a crush on a lady. Rinko suddenly opens the door just to warn him to shut his mouth with a threatening expression, saying that he'll taint Kunon's heart too. She goes back with Kunon and tells him that this town is bad for his education, so they must hurry to Durashik. Kunon simply walks away from the store and mentions that she's scarier than Iko when she's mad. As soon as they leave, the Saint of the Holy Kingdom enters the store, saying that she's been told that he has a rare scarf made of dark fox. She suddenly notices the dark fox he's holding, and the other girls mention that they thought they didn't like humans. The shopkeeper tries to explain, but the Saint can instantly tell that it's a spell, and with only one touch, the dark fox turns into water, getting his pants wet. The Saint apologizes for that, saying that she didn't expect it to be water. Meanwhile, the other girls inspect the water on the shopkeeper's pants, trying to analyze the amount of magical power used. The shopkeeper just wonders what kind of torturous day it is, while the Saint simply thinks about the fact that this is a spell outside of her knowledge. Soon enough, Kunon and Rinko finally get to Durashik, and he's finally at the magic school. Rinko tells him that he should rest, and asks him if he'll live in a dorm from now on. Kunon informs her that basically all students at the magic school will live in the dorm, and if they ask, an attendant can live with them. Unfortunately, when they get to reception, the woman there informs them that the dorm is full and there's no vacancy. The application for the dorm is long past due, something Kunon didn't know, because Xianli never mentioned that to him. Before they leave, the receptionist gives them a list of real estate agents, saying that they give it out to the applicants who couldn't get into the dorm. Thanks to that, Kunon soon finds a rental house where he and Rinko can live without problems. In the meantime, a man and a woman deliver the list of incoming students at the School of Magic, saying that some are eligible for the advanced class. The man mentions that one of the students apparently is a student of Xianli Finrol, and it is surprising enough that Xianli took a student at all, which makes him stand out even more. The next day, at the entrance exam check-in, the receptionist tells Rinko that no one can enter except for the students and authorized people. Rinko tries to bribe her with a coin, but this obviously doesn't work, so she has no choice but to be left out. Kunon follows the receptionist and tells her that he doesn't know what to call her, but not having a name is also tantalizing. The receptionist doesn't understand what he means because she does have a name, but she only then realizes that she hasn't introduced herself. Without realizing, she ends up revealing that her name is Lubella, and Kunon is pleased to finally know her name. Lubella decides not to say anything about the way he speaks, and asks him to wait with the other students for now. The Saint is with the other students about to take the entrance exam, and the three of them instantly notice Kunon's eye patch and cane, but no one says a word about it. Kunon uses his glass eye to see them as well, and notices that the first guy has some kind of lizard on his shoulder. The other student is surrounded by some white particles, while the Saint has a holy light coming from her back. Without hesitation, Kunon approaches the Saint of the Holy Kingdom and excitedly greets her, saying that he's never met a light attribute sorcerer before. The Saint keeps a flat expression and asks him how he dares behave so familiarly with her. Kunon entirely ignores that question and mentions that light is the only attribute that allows her to heal, so he has a lot of questions. The Saint straight up tells him that if he's trying to hit on her, then the answer is no, but Kunon insists, since he wants to know more about her magic. He even offers her some sweets in exchange, and the other applicants can tell that he's quite a character. The Saint simply asks him what he plans to do after she tells him about light magic. After all, light stands higher than other attributes, and she doesn't know if inferior magic can learn from superior magic. Kunon is left a little confused by this, and one of the applicants mentions that there's no clear hierarchy in magic. Seeing their reaction, the Saint clarifies that she's not aware of this herself, but she lacks emotions compared to other people. That's why even if she thinks that she's speaking normally, they might feel offended, and she wanted to let them know that in advance. The Saint explains that she's a hero's scar, star, and Kunon realizes that, just like him, she carries the curse of the Demon Lord. However, that only makes him feel more excited, and he tells her that that only makes her more fascinating, so he wants to hear more, because he's sure that it's fate that they met here today. The saint lets him know that she has no idea what he's talking about, though, and the professor soon interrupts their conversation, asking them to save their flirting for later. Kunon can immediately tell that the professor is strong, and with his glass eye, he notices that he's surrounded by 4 light orbs. On the other hand, the woman next to the professor is surrounded by mice for some reason. The man introduces himself as Soft Cricket, a professor at the Darashic School of Magic. He mentions that the woman next to him is his assistant, Seifi, who's not an official employee, but more like an associate professor. Without wasting any time, Soft congratulates all 4 of them on their enrollment. The 4 applicants are all surprised by this, except for the saint, who has no reaction at all. They were expecting an entrance exam before passing, but Soft explains that at this school, they can basically pass if they're a sorcerer. They never announce that to the public, of course, and sorcerers with crests are rare and precious, so they would never leave them alone. Kunon is a little disappointed, though, because he studied a lot for the exam. Soft clarifies that they'll still take the exam, and that's why he asked them 4 to be here today. He explains that there are 3 courses at the Darashic School of Magic. The first level, also known as Fundamentals, is a class to learn the basics of magic, as the name suggests. The second level is called Teacher Assisted, and it's closer to how a class is taught in a normal school. It's also the class that has the most students. Lastly, the advanced 3rd level class is also called Independent Research, and they're usually not in their classroom. They can choose what they want to do, what to learn, and study it wherever they like. Soft explains that they can choose to improve their magic skills or develop new spells or write grimoires or invent new magic tools. Kunon already likes that idea because he gets to research what he wants in the advanced class, which is perfect for him. However, Soft clarifies that the advanced class is for fostering the top-tier sorcerers, so getting into it and graduating won't be easy. The 4 of them came with letters of recommendation from their country or their masters of magic because they think they have enough skill to be in the advanced class. Soft informs them that first is the practical skill test, so one by one, he wants them to step forward and tell him their crest's attribute, its rank, and the number of spells they can use. The guy who had a lizard on his shoulders is the first one to step forward, introducing himself as Hank Beat. He tells the professor that he has a 2-star fire crest, and he can use 7 spells. Soft asks him to show him his best spell, so Hank pulls out his magic wand and casts a spell called Karyu. Kunon observes the spell up close, noticing that the flame goes up along the magical power that precedes it. It's an elementary spell that isn't so difficult, and the magical power to determine the root seems more important than the flame itself. The structure is simple, so its applications are limitless. Kunon finds that very informative, and once Hank finishes his spell, Soft recognizes that it wasn't bad at all, since his control is especially excellent. The next student who steps forward introduces himself as Rhea House, and mentions that his attribute is Wind. He's a 2-star, and has 8 spells he can use. Soft is surprised that he can use 8 spells at his age, and tells him that he has a Wind crest as well, which makes him want to root for him. Rhea thanks him for the support, but he nervously asks everyone to keep their distance before he casts his best spell. Once everyone takes a step back, Rhea raises his wand and uses a spell called Fugaru. It's an intermediate spell that draws the magical power in the sky to collect air and turn it into wind to release it. Kunon notices that the intermediate magic uses way more magical power, apparently, not that he can actually see it. It is quite different from the elementary magic, which he finds very interesting. The next one who steps forward is the Saint, who introduces herself as Reyes Saint Lance, and says that her attribute is 3-star light. She mentions that she can use 5 spells, and her best one is healing magic, but since no one is injured right now, she'll use a different spell. Reyes uses her staff to cast a spell called Sorcerer, shooting a ray of light at high speed. Kunon is shocked by how fast that was, knowing that no one would be able to evade that unless they react before she casts it. It is now his turn to step forward, so he introduces himself, saying that he's a 2-star of water and has 2 spells he can use. Everyone is surprised that he can only use 2 spells, unlike the others, but Kunon confidently says that he can use elementary A Ori and A Rubu. Sof is still surprised that he can only use 2 elementary spells, since he's been told to make his exam extra hard despite that. Kunon wasn't aware of this, so the professor explains that he has 2 letters of recommendation under his name. One is from the Grand Master of the Royal Sorcerers of Huglia, Master Londemond, and the other letter is the request to make his exam challenging, which came from his master, Zionli Finrol. Both Hank and Rhea are surprised to hear that name, and they can't believe Kunon is the student of the best-selling sorcerer. Kunon asks the professor if he knows his master, and Sof informs him that every sorcerer in education knows Zionli Finrol, and according to him, Kunon should be able to complete any assignment he gives, so he has to make it extra hard, because he'll show him what his student is capable of. The other students can already tell what Zionli's personality is like just with that letter, and they're not very impressed. Kunon has no other choice but to accept Zionli's request, and Zephi can't keep her words to herself, saying that she can see that his impudence comes from that man. She also complains about how audacious he is, saying that she hates his pretentious calmness and how flirty he is. Sof tries to tell her that she should keep that to herself, but Zephi says that it doesn't matter, because Kunon is supposed to be the masterpiece of that man who rarely acknowledges anyone. That's why she wants to give him the toughest exam down and send him back home. Kunon calmly asks her if she has history with his master, and Zephy denies it with irritation, letting him know that there actually is history between them. Leaving that aside, Soph decides to begin with his practical skill test, and Kunon asks Reyes to watch him because he'll give it his all, and maybe they can go somewhere together afterward. Soph cuts him off and asks him to stop flirting, and he then uses a spell called Furuguru. This is an intermediate spell that creates a wall of wind around the caster, a whirlpool of magical power. Soph asks Kumon to try to hit him with his magic, but the other students know that water will be repelled easily with a wind spell like that, and if anyone touches that wall of wind carelessly, they'll be shredded to pieces. Soph simply waits to see what Kunon will do, because strong wind will shut out water, and those with no attack magic can't possibly break through this wall of wind. He's also on his guard, so even a fairly skilled sorcerer would find this assignment difficult. Not to mention Kunon only has 2 elementary spells, so he really wants to see what he'll do. Kunon only observes his spell in silence for a moment, and then asks him if that's really it, since he thought it'd be more challenging. Soph is surprised to know he's actually unsatisfied, but he still asks him to complete the assignment first, saying that girls won't like him if he's all talk and no action. Kunon is easily convinced with that, so he uses Aori to create several water balls in the air. Soph warns him that he won't be able to break through his Furuguru with that, so Kunon simply starts multiplying his spell. After doing that numerous times, he turns the water red, creating a dense mist that surrounds the professor entirely. Soph recognizes that he has nowhere to run now, but he asks him if that's all he can do. Kunon just uses Aori again to create a chair and tells him that it's over, because he can keep this spell up for at least 2 days, and he knows that Soph can't sustain a spell that requires so much magical power for that long. He won't even last for half a day, and there was no rule about time limit, so this assignment is over. Kunon sits down to prove his point, and Soph soon recognizes his defeat, realizing that Kunon made this assignment into a test of endurance, and he's quite at a disadvantage. If he uses less magical power, the red mist will overwhelm him, so that isn't an option. Compared to intermediate magic, elementary magic is easy to sustain, so he decides to give up. Kunon cheers for his victory, while Soph realizes that Zeonli has sent him a child with frightening potential. Zephy is not happy to know that Kunon passed, but Lubella soon informs them that it's almost time for the interview. She suddenly notices the red water pooling on the ground and screams, thinking it's a sea of blood. Kunon soon realizes his mistake, and it's the second time it happens. Soph takes all the students to a classroom, but Kunon continues talking to Reyes, saying that he'd like to combine her light magic and his water magic. Reyes tells him that she's not interested, but Kunon insists, and offers to buy her a Dirashik specialty, a magic parfait. Once again, Soph asks him to stop flirting, and informs them that they'll now have an individual interview. When he asks them if they have any questions, Kunon tells him that the saint totally shuts him down, so he wants him to give her a warning. Soph simply mentions that he's heard many questions in his life, but that one's definitely a first. Zephy just tells him that they should send Kunon back home, like she suggested. Soph dismisses her proposal with a laugh and gives Kunon a warning, saying that no flirting is allowed until the exam is over. After all, he shouldn't disturb others' peace of mind, because this is a critical moment. Kunon finally understands and decides to sit down, apologizing to Reyes for his behavior, since he knows that ladies' hearts race faster when an attractive gentleman hits on them. Zephy harshly cuts him off and announces that they'll begin with the interviews, so she asks Hankbeat to follow her first. Once he leaves with her, Kunon asks the professor who will interview him and about what. Soph only tells him that he'll see that for himself, and mentions that the topics can change, so it depends. Kunon assumes that they can ask him about the ladies he likes, or how many ladies he's fallen in love with. The professor assures him that no one would ask such questions to a 12-year-old though, so Kunon decides to ask him more about his wind magic. Zephy then returns to take Ria to the interview, so Kunon assumes that they'll be dismissed after the interview. When Soph confirms this, Kunon freaks out and holds on to the saint, saying that he hopes they'll be in the same class, because he doesn't want this to be goodbye. Zephy soon returns to take Reyes to the interview, so Kunon is left alone with the professor. He mentions that he would rather be alone with a lady, and Soph clarifies it's the same for him. That aside, he asks him if he had a next move in mind if there was a time limit in the practical skill test. Kunon affirms that he did have a next move in mind, saying that he was thinking of a direct approach. He was hoping he could do something with erosion, fusion, and gaining control. Soph assumes that he was planning to erode his wind with his mist to fuse with it, and then interfere with his magical power to gain control of the wind. Kunon confirms it, saying that it was his plan, since his gut said it was possible. He explains that gaining control of another is easier from the inside rather than the outside. Magic is connected to the caster, so introduce water, or rather, let it interfere with the other's magic. Water can penetrate most materials, so he thinks it's the best attribute. He wishes he could say that it was also the strongest, but he didn't beat his master, so he can't claim that yet. That's why he wants to study a lot in this school, learn many things, and surpass Zeonli someday. Kunon walks out of the classroom as he speaks, knowing that it's his turn to go to the interview. Zephy guides him to the interview room, but before walking in, Kunon asks her what's on the other side of the door. She realizes that he really can't see, and Kunon feels a soft wind coming from the room, so he asks her if it leads to outside. Zephy clarifies that no one knows for sure, but to put it simply, it's night beyond this door. Kunon asks her if there is solid ground, and Seifi assures him that he won't fall. She asks him if he'll be alright by himself though, and tells him that she can go along if necessary. Kunon tells her that he'll be fine, and mentions that the fact that it is night in that room is actually fascinating. Without wasting more time, he steps into the room and everything goes black. Kunon truly can't see anything, not even with his glass eye, and his magical power can't detect anything either. It's been a while since he's become totally blind, but he can tell that the ground is earth, and he feels wind. He also smells dirt and grass, so there's probably a sky full of stars above him, but he can't see it. A voice suddenly speaks to him, saying that he's Xianli's student for sure. 7 figures suddenly surround him, so Kunon introduces himself, and an old woman approaches him, saying that Xianli was a prodigy, enough to make her acknowledge him. Kunon suddenly cuts her off and asks her not to get too close to him, because he has a fiancée, so he shouldn't get too close to other women. The old woman mentions that she saw him incessantly hit on the saint, but Kunon clarifies that he just wanted to ask her about magic, alone. She then informs him that she's an old woman, much older than he is, but Kunon explains that a gentleman never changes how he treats women based on their age. She's probably a mature lady who knows both the bitter and sweet, and he's sure that she's even more skilled as a sorcerer than Xianli, so he's already fascinated by her. The old woman simply sighs, and the other figures around them laugh, so she decides to leave that subject aside and asks him if he learned anything today. Kunon tells her that the magic he saw was all new to him, and he'd love to apply it to his magic, so he's going to try it out as soon as he gets home. The old woman recognizes how energetic he is, and tells him that the interview is over, so she'll put him in the advanced class, like he wanted. The old woman introduces herself as Grey Ruva, but before she can finish her sentence, Kunon thanks her for her time and leaves. That hurts her feelings a little, because when she told Xianli she would teach him, his face lit up with joy, but Kunon didn't even let her finish. In the meantime, Soph reads Xianli's letter, where he tells him that he's taken in a student, and he's very proud of him. He's 1 in a million, and he'll easily surpass Soph in a few years. Not that he's special as himself, though. Soph can tell that Xianli hasn't changed by the way he speaks in the letter, but he knows that he's right. And just by the things he saw today, he knows that Kunon Gurion will become the cerulean sorcerer one day, just like Xianli said in the letter. Even Grey Ruva recognizes that Kunon tried to see something, and even though it was still unfinished, he used a spell she's never seen before, and reminded her why magic is so fun. Soon after that, Arsene and Tinaliza receive a letter from Rinko, and they're happy to know that Kunon passed the exam with flying colors and was placed in the advanced class, the highest class in the magic school. However, their expressions change to horror when Rinko also mentions that he sort of overdid the exam and painted the schoolyard red. Now he's called Kunon Gurion of the Sea of Blood incident, or a troublemaker, but Rinko assures them it's just the fruit of his talent, so it's all good. Arsene suddenly snaps and crushes the letter in his hands, saying that it's not all good, so he'll stop sending money for a month as a punishment. Tinaliza tries to protest and tells him that that's too cruel for Kunon, but Arsene doesn't change his mind. Kunon soon is informed by the professors that allowances are forbidden for everyone, but he simply laughs, saying that he likes how the magic school works. The rest of the classroom remains silent at his reaction, and Ria tells him that he doesn't think it's a laughing matter. Hank decides to ask them if they're saying advanced students are supposed to make their own living, and Soph confirms it. However, Rhea suddenly stands up and tells him that she can't accept that, because she came here to learn magic, so she has no time to figure out how to make ends meet. Soph reminds her that she's in the advanced class, where they foster top-tier sorcerers, and one of the conditions for being top-tier is being able to make money. If she can't make money on her own, she'll never be top-tier, and it's as easy as that. After class, both Hank and Ria are shocked to find out that Reyes's living expenses are 1.5 million NECA a month, but Kunon only assumes that a lady needs money to invest in herself. Reyes clarifies that she has 2 maids who double as her guards, so on top of her living expenses, she needs to pay their salaries, and she doesn't know what to do. Seifi soon takes them all to an individual lab and explains that every student in the advanced class is assigned a lab room. Reyes assumes that they want them to pay for this too, but Seifi informs her that the use of the lab is free, but they're responsible for the medicine and books for their research. They're free to study hard or slack off, but if they don't earn enough credits, they'll be demoted to the 2nd level. Ria right then remembers Soph's words when he told him that credits are earned for experiments and achievements in magic. The achievements acknowledged by the professors will be awarded credits, and they affect their promotion. Seifi wishes them good luck on their work, and asks them to do their best. Kunon simply smiles and tells her that he's pretty sure he can manage, because his master and he have made quite a bit of money before. Seifi's expression instantly turns into disgust as she thinks about Xianli again, but Kunon clarifies that he didn't even pay him part-time. He mentions that Xianli found his job as a magical engineer at this school, so he's really lucky to have found a job for life in magic. Kunon admits that he's dreamed of working in the field of magic since he was small too. This surprises everyone in the room, and Hank tells him that he didn't expect him to be so serious about his future. Kunon then decides to ask Reyes what kind of job she will do with light magic. He's really interested, so he'd like her to tell him about it after this, and he can take them to a really great magic parfait shop. As always, Reyes rejects him right away, not giving him a chance. Kunon returns home feeling down that evening, and he tells Rinko that the saint always turns him down. After learning of the situation, Rinko puts on a pair of glasses to speak seriously with him, like an older sister. She firmly explains explains that he can't be pushy with girls because a gentleman respects a lady's wishes more than anything. He also shouldn't be alone with a girl, since it causes unnecessary misunderstandings. Kunon silently accepts the lecture and tells her that he'll be careful from now on. Rinko remains firm because she knows that she has to nudge him towards the right track. Her sister's idea of a gentleman is kind of skewed, so she has to do something about it. Leaving that aside for now, Rinko takes off her glasses and asks him if he'll be able to make money for himself since he can't get an allowance. Kunon assures her that he can pay her salary just fine, and that's exactly what she wanted to hear. Meanwhile, Reyes is in a difficult situation, and one of her maids asked the school and confirmed she is not allowed to receive support from the Holy Kingdom or donations, just like the guidelines said. They said one is forbidden from receiving money and goods from any party. The other maid tells her that she doesn't need to get paid, and Reyes says that that would help a lot. The maid quickly backtracks and clarifies that she just wanted to say that, but she really does need the money. Reyes's healing magic can't be used for business purposes, which really leaves them in a rough situation. The next day, she goes to school still thinking about this because she needs to pay 1.5 million NECA. She suddenly notices a line of students in front of one of the labs, and Hank informs her that Kunon started a business, and it was an instant hit. A student asks Kunon for a 60-minute course because she pulled an all-nighter for an experiment and she really wants to get deep sleep. Kunon tells her that he can personally guarantee her a well-rested time, so he guides her inside the lab and informs the others that all the slots are full, which means they have to wait for about 30 minutes. All the students complain at the same time, and they certainly look exhausted enough. Soph and Seifi arrive to see what's going on, since it's an impressive line of clients. Kunon spots their curiosity and informs them that he has started a sleep sanctuary. This leaves them a little confused, so Kunon decides to show them instead, and they see a bunch of students peacefully sleeping on comfy waterbeds. Even the person who just went in is already sound asleep, which is really impressive. Kunon explains that he created these waterbeds with magic, and it's the only thing his master acknowledged and complimented. Soph is surprised to hear that Zeonli gave a compliment at all, and Seifi once again can't hide her irritation at the name. Soph certainly never thought about making sleep a business, but it looks like he's doing well. Kunon tells him that once sorcerers start experiments or research, they get sucked in and pull all-nighters. He knows this very well because Zeonli and himself used to stay up all night because of their experiments, and they never stopped despite Iko's constant scolding. That's how he figured out he could offer the students a nice brief nap, since a lot of them truly crave some sleep. Soph suddenly looks him dead in the eyes and tells him that his request for an additional lab space is granted, so he must make this available to professors too. Kunon tells him that charging professors feels wrong, but Soph cuts him off and asks him not to worry about it, because there are tons of people like that here. That said, they all enjoy a good nap, and all the students look renewed after they get some good sleep. They all feel refreshed, as if they slept half a day with only a 60-minute nap, and the teachers are also delighted, so Kunon makes a fortune with this business. This hit starts drawing attention towards him, and there are 3 girls that are clearly interested about him because he's Zeonli's student. On the other hand, unlike Kunon's success, Reyes is not doing very well, and at dinner, she's just eating plain bread with her maids, thinking that life sure is hard. She already discussed this with her teachers, but they all suggested that she should ask Kunon Gurion for advice. The maids ask her what her other classmates say, but Reyes clarifies that they also said it'd be best to ask for advice from Kunon Gurion. She doesn't understand why she should ask for advice from someone so frivolous, though. Either way, since she has no other choice, Reyes meets with Kunon at school the next day. She's clearly not thrilled about this, though, and mentions that if she had to name the emotion she's feeling right now, it would be humiliation. Kunon is ready to listen, but Reyes clarifies that she never wanted to rely on him because she doesn't know what he will ask of her in return. Kunon assures her that a gentleman would never prey on a lady's vulnerability, so she'll just owe him a favor. Reyes tells him that she would rather not owe him anything, but she still has to do this, so she decides to inform him about her situation. Kunon stops her right there and asks her to call Seifi here before she begins. Once the professor is with them, Seifi admits that it was an appropriate decision to call her here. Kunon explains that, as a gentleman, he should avoid being alone with a lady, just like Rinko said. Reyes clearly wasn't expecting that from him, but she's gladly impressed and decides to speak now that Seifi is present. Once Kunon hears about her situation and knows that she has no way of making money, he suggests healing wounds with her magic. Reyes rejects the idea and explains that her healing magic is a holy power bestowed from her ancestors and God, so she can't use it to make money. Since that's not a possibility, Kunon proposes spell verification and archival reports of experiments. There are sorcerers who want to buy these as data after all, but coming from them, the new students at this school, their work may not be as valuable. She can't use healing magic and has no capital for a business, and learning the know-how takes time. Kunon then asks her about her purification magic, wanting to know if she can use that for products. Reyes lets him know it's not a problem, so Kunon asks her if she'd like to create and sell magic tools with him. Seifi stops them right there, saying that a hit with a magic tool is huge, and if their product sells well, there are bound to be problems if they share the rights to it. Kunon clarifies that Reyes is the lead, even though they'll be creating it together. She's in need of money right now, so they shouldn't worry about what happens after they create the magic tool. Seifi decides to allow it in that case, saying that it's all right as long as he's okay with it. Reyes then accepts his proposal, and Kunon is simply excited excited about doing light magic experiments. Soon after that, they meet with Sorcerer Golin, a professor with the light attribute. Seifi thanks the professor for escorting them and finally takes her leave, so Sorcerer gives Kunon a small box, saying that it's what he asked for. Kunon thanks her and opens the box to show Reyes 5 seeds of Shishilla, the sacred herb. He informs her that they're going to grow it, but Reyes tells him that that's not possible because the sacred herb Shishilla can only grow in Holy Land. Kunon clarifies that that's what he heard, but he did some research on sacred herbs and Holy Land, and he knows that Holy Land is a place imbued with holy magic and purification power. Reyes tells him that she's been to a Holy Land once, and the land was purified by holy magical power. Kunon explains that that's exactly his point, because she can use purification magic for business, and he's wondering if they can artificially create Holy Land. The personal spell of the Saint Sanctum might do the trick, in his opinion, so they should give it a try. Kunon plants the Shishilla seeds into 5 pots, and Sorcerer mentions that a holy barrier created by Sanctum will reproduce the state of Holy Land. There are records that document their similarities, so she also thinks it's worth a try. Reyes decides to focus and uses her light magic to cast a holy barrier over the Shishilla seeds. After a few seconds, both Kunon and the professor are excited to see that they successfully got sprouts of Shishilla. He immediately writes down everything that just happened, and he even says that one book won't be enough to document this. Reyes notices the way he acts when it comes to magic, and realizes that Kunon actually wanted to experiment, so he really wasn't hitting on her like she thought. She's clearly relieved by this, and asks him what they'll do now. Kunon asks her if she'd like to go out for some tea, but clarifies that he would rather have lunch with her. Reyes' relief fades immediately, realizing that he is actually hitting on her. She clarifies that she's talking about the sacred herb, of course, so Kunon tells her that they will process it to make medicine. Sacred herb Shishilla is rare and expensive, so if they succeed, making 1.5 million NECA isn't a dream. Reyes is surprised by his reasoning, because she gave it a lot of thought and came up with nothing, but he came up with a way to make money with magic in such a short time. Kunon notices her staring at him and asks her if she was admiring his profile and if she fell for him again. Reyes tells him that she wasn't admiring him to begin with, and she's clearly not impressed by his assumption. Sorcerer tells Kunon that she's glad his 1 million NECA didn't go to waste, and Reyes asks her what the money was for. The professor informs her that it's the price of these seeds, because one seed is 200,000 NECA, so the total was 1 million. They have to pay for what they use in their magic experiments after all. Reyes tells her that she doesn't have that kind of money, but Sorcerer explains that it's for Kunon. Kunon clarifies that the deal was that they'd be free with the success of the cultivation of the herb and the report on its growth. With that, Reyes figures out that Kunon was planning to pay the price in case it didn't succeed. Kunon confirms it and tells her that that's why he's glad that it was a success in the end, and it's all thanks to her. Reyes gives him a little smile, but mentions that if she had to define what she's feeling right now, she'd say that she's feeling sorry because she caused him trouble. She decides to apologize for that, but Kunon clarifies that he would rather hear thank you instead of sorry. Reyes smiles again at that and thanks him, but her smile falls immediately when Kunon asks her if she fell for him once again. After a while, all the Shishilla flowers bloom successfully, so the professor wastes no time and starts grinding the petals. She then mixes in the dried Ayo grass, and Kunon finishes up by casting Arubu. Thanks to this, his magic turns the mix into several small pills, and they soon take them to the guild. An appraiser takes a good look at them, and confirms that they're unmistakably pills of sacred herd Shishilla, and, at this purity, he would say they're worth 2 million NECA. Reyes sighs in relief as soon as she hears that, because it's even more than the 1.5 million she needed. After that hit, Kunon decides to take Reyes and her maids out for lunch, to celebrate closing the deal. The maids are a little reluctant to accept so much food, but Kunon tells them that it is a gentleman's joy to dedicate his wallet to attractive ladies so they can order whatever they like. The 2 maids thank him greatly for everything, because now they can get paid, and he negotiated a long-term contract with the guild for them. Kunon clarifies that he got to write a report on light magic, not to mention have lunch with Reyes, so he's really happy. Reyes just thanks him for the food, and they all cheer before enjoying their meal. Despite his own words, Kunon returns to school looking kind of hurt, because that lunch was 220,000 NECA. He heard they had to starve themselves for a while, but it's still quite a punch to his wallet, especially the wine, since those maids drank the vintage wine with 20,000 NECA like water. Even if it's for ladies, he should refrain from saying that they can order whatever they want from now on. At least he learned a good lesson, so he's satisfied with the result. Kunon casually runs into Ria and Hank, who tell him that they're not really sure where to begin to start earning money. Kunon dismisses their comment and tries to go into his lab, but Ria quickly stops him and asks him for his advice. Kuno clarifies that if they were ladies, he would have done everything in his power to help them, but that's not the case. Both Hank and Ria already had figured as much, so they're not very surprised by this. Kunon notices their sad expressions though, so he asks them if they'll help with his ideas. He'd like Hank to make bacon he can eat, and he wants Raya to fly, although those ideas sound crazy to them. In the meantime, inside Kunon's lab, there are still plenty of students taking a nap on the comfy waterbeds. The 3 girls from before wake up from their naps at the same time, and at first glance, they can tell that they're all here for the same reason, gathering information to get Kunon Gurion. Back to Kunon, he reassures Hank and Ria about his proposal, assuring that he will pay them, and it's better than wasting their time away. After he convinces them, Kunon talks with Soph and Seifi about his new product, the giant hairless rat, for holding and going to sleep with. He explains that he received feedback that if the pillow is different, it can be harder to fall asleep even on a waterbed. That's why he thought a giant hairless rat would be a good idea, since they'll fall asleep with it no matter what. Kunon offers them to try it out, but Soph decides to pass, saying that he has a feeling he'll be obsessed once he touches it. Seifi, on the other hand, seems tempted to use it, but she forces herself to stay away as well for the same reason. Once Kunon leaves, Seifi mentions that it seems to be going well, and Soph admits that it's impressive, since Kunon built such an efficient system to make money in no time. Seifi tells him that Reyes is doing well too, and Hank and Rhea have started their experiments thanks to Kunon's advice. Today marks 1 month since they enrolled here, so she supposes they don't need to supervise them anymore. Soph agrees, and since it's been a month already, he mentions that perhaps the factions will make a move soon. As soon as he says that, the door opens, and the 3 girls from before ask for Kunon, but they leave after Soph informs them that Kunon had just left. With this, Seifi and Soph confirm that the factions are already on the move, apparently, and they're all after Kunon. Meanwhile, Kunon introduces his new product to his clients, saying that they now have a soft, smooth, giant hairless rat, the perfect companion for their peaceful sleep. Plenty of students decide to take the 60-minute course with the add-on, and some of them even take the 90-minute course. The business is doing well as usual, so Kunon decides to leave the lab to go outside and see how Hank is doing with the bacon. Hank looks really stressed after burning the bacon once again, and Kunon wordlessly uses Aori to put out the fire. He tells him that he wants him to make bacon that can satisfy him soon, but Hank clarifies that he's never made bacon with fire magic before. Kunon explains that bacon is smoked for a long time rather than putting it on the fire, so he thinks it's possible if he can maintain a constant heat. Hank is already aware of that, but he tells him that maintaining it for a long time is difficult. Kunon stares at him for a moment, but he saves his words for himself and simply tells him that he has to try again. Meanwhile, Rhea is casting his Fura spell to try to fly, but he quickly loses control and gets sent into the air. Right before he crashes on the ground, Kunon saves him with a squishy waterbed to absorb the impact of the fall. Rhea thanks him for that, and Kunon tells him that he needs to figure out how to float with stability first. At lunch, Kunon asks the school cook to make sandwiches with the bacon Hank cooked, even though it's burnt, since he can't let food go to waste. He asks Hank to take responsibility and eat these too though, and Rhea decides to have some as well, because he wants to save up as much money as he can. Kunon easily agrees, since he and Hank won't be able to finish all these sandwiches themselves. Surprisingly, Reyes decides to join them as well, and Kunon is completely thrilled to have lunch with her. Reyes simply tells him that she doesn't have to pay when she goes to lunch with him, so she's grateful for that. Everyone takes a bite at the same time, and they all react the same, realizing that these sandwiches aren't actually edible. Rhea decides to take the bacon out of the sandwich, but Reyes tries to force herself to eat it. Both Kunon and Rhea panic when they see how sick she looks, so they tell her that she doesn't have to push herself. Knowing that it's his fault, Hank immediately apologizes, saying that he's really ashamed. Sometime later, a long line of students is waiting for Kunon to attend his business, since they all need some good sleep. The 3 girls from different factions also wait for him there after searching for him everywhere in school, realizing that they should have waited for him here to begin with, instead of looking all over for him like fools. They clearly don't get along well, but as soon as Kunon returns, the 3 girls run to the start of the line, wanting to talk to him. The students quickly complain and ask them not to cut in line, since they could collapse from fatigue at any moment. The girls apologize and decide to wait for their turn at the end of the line, and once they can finally speak to Kunon, they get distracted when they see a picture of the hairless rat. Kunon explains that it's a sinful add-on for princesses who are in need of cradles to whisk them away to even better sleep. The waterbed itself provided a sanctuary already, so the girls are really interested in that magic for even better rest. Kunon asks them what they're going to do, and clarifies that there are 3 beds remaining. Curiosity wins over their mission, so the girls easily give in and decide to sleep instead of talking to Kunon about their factions. Meanwhile, Hank continues trying his best with the bacon, using a spell called Kashi to light a fire. It's easy to produce fire, but he knows that he has to maintain a constant heat, which is easier said than done. Rhea, on the other hand, manages to use his magic to keep himself in the air, and he slowly tries to go higher. In the meantime, Seifi decides to check Reyes' new batch of Shishilla, and mentions that Sorcerer was raving about the quality of her previous report. Despite that, Reyes tells her that she's still not convinced, and she doesn't understand why it's necessary for them to make money with magic. Seifi explains that ever since they were small, they all have only been doing experiments and research on magic. In society, there are people who try to deceive and take advantage of naive sorcerers like them. Magic is a special power given only to the chosen people, so their job as professors is to foster sorcerers who can use that power correctly by making them work to learn about society. Reyes is finally convinced by that explanation, so Seifi mentions that it's now Hank and Rhea's turn to figure it out. Reyes tells her that they've got Kunon, and even though he's frivolous, she's sure that they'll learn a lot from him. Seifi agrees with her, and she then remembers that recruiting for factions has started today, so she asks her if anyone has come to see her or Kunon. Reyes clarifies that no one has talked to them about any of that, which is really strange to Seifi. In the meantime, the representatives of different factions also think that it's strange that that they haven't gotten any word from the students they sent out for recruitment. It's only the first day, so there shouldn't be any rush, and they're all still patiently waiting, having no idea that the girls they sent out for recruitment are peacefully sleeping in waterbeds with giant hairless rats. During lunch, Reyes decides to mention what Seifi told her about the factions, saying that they're organizations of the students in the advanced class. Ria mentions that, among them, the three largest factions are ability, harmony, and rationality. Students in the advanced class are treated as full-fledged sorcerers, so professors don't intervene more than necessary. Hank explains that these are kind of like mutual aid associations of students who help each other when in need. Kunon mentions that he knows a lot, and Hank informs him that he used to be an assistant to a professor here. Despite the sound of it, Kunon confesses that he's not really too interested, since they're in a free environment and all. Hank reminds him that there are experiments that require a lot of help, so belonging to a faction can be helpful then. Reyes mentions that recruitment was forbidden for the first month so they could get used to school life, but apparently, yesterday was the opening day. Kunon asks them if they can put in a request, and Hank confirms it, saying that he's thinking about joining Harmony. Ria and Reyes are still not sure about which one they'll choose though, so they all start thinking about it. Since they can't decide, they forget about it for a moment to have lunch, and Hank seems pretty confident in today's sandwiches, since he didn't burn the bacon this time. He mentions that he roasted it slowly on a low heat, so it should taste better than the last one. Despite this, everyone reacts just the same as the last time when they take a bite out of their sandwiches, not liking the strong, salty flavor. Hank doesn't understand what he did wrong, but Kunon tells him that he'll just have to try again. Meanwhile, at the Rationality faction headquarters, Lulu, the representative, asks the student he sent out the day before what she did all day. He's clearly not happy that he got no word from her, and his voice sounds harsh, so the girl can do nothing but apologize. Right after this, Lulu asks her if that worked, and the girl quickly stands up and laughs, saying that that tone really suits him since he sounds like a demon lord. Lulu clarifies that this is rather against his will because that's not how he usually acts at all. Meanwhile, at the Harmony faction, the blonde girl informs Shilto, the representative of the faction, that she couldn't recruit Kunon because she fell asleep. The blue-haired girl explains the same thing at the Ability faction, saying that she just couldn't resist his magic. Bale, the Ability faction's representative, is just a little confused that it all happened because of a giant hairless rat. Either way, this is just what they were expecting of Xianli's student, so the representatives of the three factions decide to personally go to school to meet Kunon themselves. They all run into each other before they can find him though, and clearly none of them have any intention of letting the other go first, so they all agree to decide on the order fair and square. In the meantime, Hank is getting sick of failing with the bacon each time, so Kunon asks him if he wants the incentive fee and the credits. Hank just thinks that he's preying on his vulnerability, but Kunon tells him that he's the problematic one here, trying to get paid for a half-baked job. That was clearly a critical hit with a fair argument, so Hank decides to keep trying. Kunon then decides to check on Raya, who informs him that he's getting the hang of floating. The next step is to try moving, so Kunon uses Aori to surround Ria in a squishy protective bubble, since it's dangerous if he falls. Ria is clearly impressed, and he starts thinking that there must be no water Kunon can't produce. Ria was born to the house of a baron in the countryside, and he was called the best sorcerer in the nation. People thought he was a future royal sorcerer, but he was just a big fish in a small pond. Ria snaps out of those thoughts and decides to focus on his current task, knowing that he just has to make money for now, for the sake of his father who scraped together the tuition for him and his entire family. Kunon tells him that he will record everything, from him flying to falling and tumbling. Ria asks him not to write about him falling and tumbling, but they soon hear a loud crash in the distance and assume that there are other students doing magic experiments over there. The loud noise actually came from the representatives of the three factions, who created a giant magic barrier to fight each other. Bale mentions that Kunon successfully completed the school's assignment in a few tries, so his skills are a better fit for the Ability faction. He casts a spell that easily breaks the ground and sends rocks as projectiles towards the other two. The other representatives use their magic to block the attack, and Shilto tells him that she heard he has a capacity for teamwork, giving advice to his classmates, so Harmony is the best fit for him. She immediately counterattacks with a powerful lightning, but Bael blocks it with a magic barrier. Lulu intervenes and clarifies that being a hero's scar, and given his exceptional magic that even made Xionli acknowledge him as a student, it's only rational that Kunon joins Rationality. He then uses his magic wand to cast an offensive spell, and the fight between the three is so fierce that it makes the ground shake. Kunon can only hear it from afar, and he mentions that it looks fun, having no idea that they're all fighting over him. Hank is still having a hard time cooking the bacon, wondering if he should use high or low heat. Kunon suddenly approaches him and asks him if he's going to leave it uncooked now, since that would be a boring failure. Hank reminds him that this is fire, so he can't do anything other than low or high heat. Kunon remembers the fact that he said he was an assistant to a professor for a long time, and Hank tells him that he was diligent, so he learned the basics and gained a lot of knowledge. Knowing this, Kunon asks him why he isn't trying anything crafty in that case, since that's what he's been waiting for. This takes Hank by surprise, and Kunon reminds him that he's not an assistant anymore, so he can let himself be free. He explains that fire can have smell or different colors, so he wants him to surprise him and to try every possible means and show him his little magic tricks. Soph calls him right then to ask him for help, saying that one of the professors pushed himself too far with his research, so he needs one of his waterbeds and a giant hairless rat. Before Kunon can leave, Hank stops him to ask him if that's what Zionli taught him. Kunon clarifies that it was actually his first teacher, because she taught him that creativity was a form of talent, though she yelled at him for calling her magic little tricks. After Kunon leaves, Hank decides to try something different with the bacon, trying to understand the concept that magic is free. He starts by changing the color of the fire several times, and he then tries to give it a smell that fits with bacon. Hank then realizes that if he can add colors and smells, then he should be able to add flavors. If he adds flavor to the aroma of herbs, it should probably work, so he decides to give it a try and experiment with his magic. He worked as an assistant for so long that he forgot that experiments allow him to try many things. Right as he's about to get serious about it, a student suddenly approaches him to ask him if he'd like to join the Harmony faction. In the meantime, Ria is still trying to learn how to fly, but he keeps falling and tumbling each time, getting saved by Kunon's water bubble. Right after he falls, the girl from the Rationality faction approaches him and explains that he loses balance because he's trying to forcibly control the wind. She advises him to try doing it as if he's going along with the wind, like he's following him. Ria is instantly captivated by her, so he takes her advice without a doubt and thanks her. At lunch, everyone's surprised that the bacon isn't so bad this time, since it has aroma and flavor now. Reyes mentions that it doesn't make her nauseous, and her body doesn't reject it as a foreign object anymore. Hank is really glad that he finally did it, and Kunon tells him that they must keep this up and try bacon on different meats. To his surprise, Hank clarifies that he knew he'd say something like that, so he planned ahead and tried other things as well. He shows them a plate with bacon of fish, chicken, and mutton, and Reyes mentions that fish is her favorite. Kunon admits that this is incredible, and what he did truly surprised him. He clarifies that he can't eat this much though, and Hank soon realizes that he messed up. They decide to sell the food to the school cafeteria, and the cook tells them that he's happy to purchase food of such quality from them, so he's looking forward to more tomorrow. Now that Hank was finally successful, Reyes asks Ria if he managed to fly. Ria confirms it, saying that he got advice from an upperclassman in Rationality, though he can't fly too far yet. Kunon tells him that once he can successfully fly long distances, he can use his magic to start a courier service. Ria only then realizes that it can be a business, so he thanks Kunon for his help, saying that he'll do his best. He also mentions that he was invited to join Rationality when he got the advice, and he's thinking about doing it. Hank tells them that he was also invited to the Harmony faction, and Reyes mentions that she was invited to Ability, but she's not sure about it yet. Kunon realizes that he's the only one who hasn't been invited to a faction, but Ria lets him know that they're actually fighting over him. Meanwhile, the fight between the three factions finally ends, and Baal wins the right of the first negotiation with Kunon Gurion as the Ability faction. The Harmony faction goes second, and the Rationality faction goes third, since Lulu was at disadvantage in terms of his attributes. He admits that it does give them advantage to negotiate first, but Kunon will be the one to choose either way. Since he's the winner, Baal immediately calls a member of the Ability faction, the biggest boy magnet of the whole faction, and gives her the task to recruit Kunon Gurion.